There is a moment in the very first episode of Steven Universe where the boy lifts his shirt to show the round pink gem in the place where a belly button would be, and a voice tells him it was his mother's, and we simply accept that. We accept it because the show is cheerful, and the song he sings is about a cat-shaped ice cream sandwich called Cookie Cat, and the woman in the giant portrait on the wall above the door has a kind face and curly pink hair. For about 3 years, that is all that scene is. Then the show comes back to it, and back to it, and back to it, and by the end, you understand that almost nothing you were shown in those opening minutes was decoration. Tonight on Futuro, we are going through the theories, the patterns, the small placements, and the buried setups that suggest Steven Universe was never improvising. So get comfortable, turn the lights down, we will be here a while, and if you have not subscribed yet, it really does help us keep making these. Start with the song. Steven is alone in his loft above the temple, and he is singing about an ice cream sandwich, and the lyric he keeps coming back to in his sweetest possible voice is that the product is gone but never forgotten, that it has been bought out by a less popular brand, that it left, and that he misses it. He sings it the way a child sings about something cute. The show wants you to hear it the way a child does. But the second time you sit with that scene after you have watched everything, the entire emotional shape of the series is already there in the lyrics of a jingle for a cartoon ice cream sandwich. Something pink and warm has gone. Something that the people around him still talk about has gone. They miss it. He has inherited the place where it used to be. Read this way, and the show invites you to, Cookie Cat is not a joke about a snack. It is a tiny acoustic confession of the central wound of the story, smuggled into the first minute so that the show can come back to it later and say, You were told in the first thing he ever sang to camera, and you laughed because it was cute. There is a reading of the scene that goes further. Steven is not just singing about a missing snack, he is performing grief he has not yet been allowed to identify. His mother is not a fact to him, she is a story other people tell. He has a picture of her, he has a sword that used to be hers, he has the room, he has the gem, he has the cheek-pinching adults who clearly knew her better than he ever will. Of course, the song about loss comes easier than a sentence about loss. The case the show keeps making, all the way through its run, is that grief in a child often looks like silliness, and that adults will sometimes mistake a joke for fine. Steven has been doing this his whole life. He has been turning the missing piece of his identity into a song you can dance to, because that is what the people around him can absorb. When Cookie Cat is discontinued in the actual plot of the episode, and he is heartbroken in a way that seems disproportionate to the snack, the disproportion is the point. He is not sad about the cookies. He has been sad his entire life, and now he finally has permission to be sad about something. The show told you, in his very first scene, that the protagonist of this story is a child who already knows how to mourn, and that he has been waiting for an excuse the world will accept. Watch the room behind him while he sings, and the same logic applies. The temple wall is dominated by the painting of rose quartz, an enormous pale figure with a sword at her side, and curls of pink hair that flow out past the frame. The painting is positioned over the doorway like an altar. Every time Steven walks into his own home, he walks under his mother. The show never points at this directly in dialogue, but the camera does repeatedly across hundreds of episodes. He stands beneath her when he is happy. He stands beneath her when he is grieving. He stands beneath her when other gems are angry with him, and the painting hangs behind him like a verdict. The entire set design of the loft is a slow argument about inherited shadow. The house is shaped like the woman he never met, and he lives inside the silhouette. By the time the show is willing to actually have him say, out loud, that he does not know who his mother was, you have spent years watching him stand under her image, and the sentence does not feel like new information. It feels like the show finally letting him say what the wall has been saying all along. Now look at the cat itself. Cookie Cat is, in the in-show advertisement, a refugee from another world who tastes good. The jingle says it was a refugee from an interstellar war. Take that seriously for a second. The mascot of the protagonist's favorite childhood snack is, by the show's own lore, a survivor of a planetary conflict, who has come to Earth and who is now slowly being phased out and replaced by something newer and easier to swallow. That is the show's premise. That is, almost word for word, the situation of the crystal gems. They are refugees from an interstellar war. They came to Earth. The world is moving on, and they are slowly becoming relics that a younger generation does not quite know how to relate to. The show puts that in a jingle in the first minute of the first episode and then walks away from it. The point here is not that one ice cream commercial is the key to all the lore. The point is that the writers had decided very early that they could place the whole shape of the story into a child's song about a snack because they were confident the rest of the series would earn it. That kind of confidence does not happen in a show that is making it up as it goes. It happens in a show that knows where it is heading. This is the pattern you will see in increasingly intricate forms all night. A song that looks like a throwaway and turns out to be the thesis. A background object that looks like decoration and turns out to be a signature. A relationship that looks like a sitcom dynamic and turns out to be the engine of a war crime. The premise of this video is that Steven Universe used the freedom of being a children's cartoon to hide an enormous quantity of structural information in plain sight, and that almost every time you think a detail is cute or arbitrary, it is doing at least one other job in the design of the story. Some of these readings are widely accepted in the fan community. Some of them are interpretive readings that the show implies but does not confirm. A few of them sit in the speculation column, where they will be flagged as theory and nothing more. The intent is not to convince you that every grain of pixel art is a clue. The intent is to make the case, slowly through example, that the show was built with an unusual amount of forethought, and that the closer you look, the harder it gets to find anything in it that was truly arbitrary. So the next time you watch the opening minute of the pilot, watch the boy under the portrait, watch the snack he is grieving, watch the song he chooses to sing about it, and watch the gem on his stomach where a navel should be. None of that is filler. It is a child performing a feeling he has not been given the words for yet, in a house shaped like a woman he never met, holding a snack that is a refugee from a war, while the bright music tells you everything is fine. That is the show. The rest of this video is going to argue that the show keeps doing that in different rooms with different objects for the next several years. The single biggest reveal the show ever pulled, the one the fandom still argues about, is that rose quartz was pink diamond. The interesting thing about the reveal is that it does not actually invent new information. It activates information you had already been given. Once you accept the premise, almost every supposedly mysterious thing about Rose, Pearl, the diamonds, Lion, and the war on Earth slots into place, and the show has been quietly placing the puzzle pieces for years before it lets you see the picture. This chapter is about how thoroughly the show foreshadowed the identity of its own founding myth, and how few of those clues felt like clues at the time. Start with the simplest one, the color. Pink diamond is pink. Rose quartz is pink. The lion is pink. Steven is pink under the right lighting, and very obviously pink when he is in his most powerful, most upset, most diamond-adjacent state in the show's final stretch. The other diamonds have associated colors that map cleanly onto their quartz. Yellow diamond has yellow pearls, yellow peridots, a yellow citadel. Blue diamond has blue pearls, blue lapis lazulis, a blue palace. White diamond has white. If the show is going to be consistent in its own logic, then anything pink and important is, in advance, pointing at the absent fourth diamond, the one nobody on Earth wants to talk about. The crystal gems are explicitly Rose Quartz's rebellion. They are explicitly pink-coated, in their leader, in their hideout, in their mascot. The Diamond Authority is supposed to be a four-sided figure of power. The show keeps cropping the symbol so that one of the four is conspicuously absent, and it is always the pink one. You were not supposed to guess Rose was pink diamond from the color palette alone, but the color palette was always honest about the fact that there was a pink diamond, and that the absence of one on Homeworld and the presence of one on Earth were two halves of the same sentence. Then, there is Pearl. In the early seasons, Pearl is presented as Rose's most devoted follower, an exquisite swordswoman with a tendency to break down whenever Rose is mentioned. She sings about how Rose belonged to her, in one of the show's most famous songs, with an intensity that the writing frames as romantic grief. That reading is true. But after the reveal, the song reads differently. In Gem Society, as the show eventually explains, pearls are not chosen by their owners, and they do not choose their owners. They are made for a specific superior, assigned and expected to perform absolute service. Pearl's behavior around Rose is not just the behavior of a lover. It is the behavior of a pearl who has been given to a diamond. The way she stands when Rose speaks. The way her eyes follow Rose across a room. The way she physically cannot keep her mouth shut on Rose's behalf even when ordered to, in the episode where her own voice is taken away from her. All of that is consistent with a pearl who has been bound to her assigned owner by Homeworld protocol. The show writes the relationship at a depth where both readings sit on top of each other, and it works at every stage of the series. But the romance reading is the only one available to a viewer who does not yet know what a pearl is. The pearl reading was always present underneath it. By the time the show is willing to give you the line in the 5th season, where Pearl finally explains how she came to be one of the only gems who ever knew the truth, you have spent years watching her behave like a pearl who was given to a diamond. and the explanation does not feel like a twist. It feels like a key. The episode in question is the one in which the show finally shows you, on screen, the conversation between Pink Diamond and Pearl in which the plan to fake Pink's death is hatched. Watch it back, and almost every fact in the episode is something the show has been hinting at for years. Pearl knew. Pearl was specifically ordered not to tell. Pink wanted to be loved as a leader, rather than feared as one. Pink hid inside the role of rose quartz, a class of gem she invented herself. The fact that rose quartzes have, throughout the show, been treated as a specifically suspect class, all of them bubbled and locked away in the zoo or in the bottom of the temple, is now explained. They are suspect because the highest authority in gem society went rogue under the body type, and nobody in power has ever fully forgiven the rest of them for the resemblance. Read this way, rose quartzes are political prisoners. They are the descendants in form of an embarrassment that Homeworld is determined to forget. The show implies, without ever saying it as a thesis sentence, that the entire setting is built around a cover-up, and that the cover-up is the reason the crystal gems on Earth have been allowed to exist as a small rebel pocket. Homeworld would rather pretend the wound did not happen than reopen it. Now move to Lion. The enormous pink lion who shows up in an early season episode, allows Steven to ride on him, has a pocket dimension inside his mane, and never speaks. Lion is canonically pink. Lion is canonically associated with Rose. Lion can do almost everything Steven can do once Steven starts unlocking his diamond powers, including the pink scream that breaks through walls. Lion's mane functions as a personal storage space for objects that mattered to Rose, including her sword, a chest, and a videotape in which she addresses Steven directly. There is a widely held theory in the fan community, very strongly implied by the show though never confirmed in dialogue, that Lion is a regular animal who was injured or killed in the desert, and that Rose used her healing tears, or a variant of her healing power, to revive him with so much of her own essence that he became permanently changed. He is pink because she made him pink. He has Steven's powers because he was, in a sense, an early version of what she would later do for her son. The show provides enough evidence for this reading that the fandom largely treats it as canon. The show stops short of confirming it out loud. The point here is not that this theory is true beyond any doubt, but that the writers built Lion specifically to be readable this way. Once you accept that Rose was Pink Diamond, Lion becomes a small, soft, walking proof that she had diamond-level abilities, long before the show was willing to tell you what those abilities were. The largest single foreshadowing arc, though, is the way the show treats Pink Diamond's supposed death across the early seasons. For years, the Crystal Gems talk about Rose shattering Pink Diamond as the founding act of their rebellion, the line they crossed, the reason Earth was a quarantined zone, the reason Homeworld was hunting them. The other gems treat Rose as a war criminal in the most precise sense, as someone who committed an unforgivable act that ended the conflict but stained her permanently. Then the reveal lands, and the act did not actually happen. The shattering was staged. Pink was the only one who could have credibly performed the assassination because she was the target, and she invented her own martyrdom in order to give her rebels a victory that would force Homeworld to retreat. Read this way, the entire founding mythology of the Crystal Gems is a lie that the founder herself constructed, and every gem who has ever loved Rose has been loving her under false pretenses. The grief Pearl feels, the worship Garnet's components offered, the awe with which Bismuth speaks of her, all of that was offered to a leader who was, in private, the person who started the system they were fighting against. The show does not unmake the love. It refuses to. But it does ask you to sit with the unsettling truth that the most adored figure in the series was, in the strict sense of the word, a fraud, and that the rebellion was at least partly an aristocratic exit strategy that succeeded by accident. The reason none of this feels random comes from how cleanly it folds back. Once you accept the reveal, every old episode reorganizes itself. The zoo, the bubbled rose quartzes, the way Pearl flinches when Rose's name comes up, the way Garnet treats Rose's authority as something to be defended even from Steven. The strange care with which the show always frames Rose's face in flashbacks, half lit and half hidden, like a portrait that is daring you to notice that it does not quite match the daughter she gave it to. All of that is now load-bearing. It was load-bearing the whole time. You just did not know what it was carrying. That is what people mean when they say the show was planned. It is not that every individual frame was storyboarded years in advance. It is that the largest secret in the lore was being honestly placed in the corner of almost every important scene, and the show was confident enough in its own runway to wait years before pointing at it. Stay inside the temple for a moment, because the building itself is doing work. The temple at the center of the show is shaped like an enormous gem fusion with 5 points, 4 pairs of arms, and a central head that contains the heart of the structure. The interior is not a normal building. Each gem has a private room behind the temple door, accessed only when their own gem is held up to the central panel, and each of those rooms is a slow, unhurried portrait of the gem who lives there. The show only takes you inside 3 of those rooms across the entire run, and the contents of each room are an argument about the character whose name is on the door. The temple is not really a set. It is a psychological diagram, and the show treats it as one. Pearl's room is a thin tower of falling water, rising platforms, and clean, reflective surfaces that always seem to be ascending. The lighting is white and blue. There is no clutter. There is almost no furniture in any conventional sense. The few objects she keeps in there are arranged with the precision of a museum display. Pearl's interior life is performance. She lives internally in a space that is meant to be looked at. The room is the architecture of someone who has spent her entire existence being a pearl. That is, a being whose purpose was to be beautiful and ornamental in the presence of a superior, and who has not entirely figured out how to be unobserved. Even her grief is staged in there. When Steven walks in on her in her room in the early seasons, she's often performing some private ritual that turns out to be about Rose, and the performance is set in an environment designed to be witnessed. Pearl does not really know how to have a private feeling. She only knows how to have a feeling on a stage that nobody else is in. That is a very specific kind of loneliness, and the show built her room to look like it. Amethyst's room is the opposite. It is a landfill. It is a vast, dark, jumbled cave full of broken machinery, lost toys, water bottles, abandoned vehicles, snack wrappers, and whole layers of geological time. There is no order. There is no obvious purpose. The interior of Amethyst's private space is, very literally, garbage. The show plays this for comedy at first. Then, slowly, you understand what the room is saying about her. Amethyst was made on Earth in the kindergarten by accident, late after the war was already lost. The show is increasingly explicit in the later seasons that Amethyst's central wound is the belief that she was a mistake, that she was not supposed to exist, and that the world has been kind enough to find a use for her anyway. Her room is full of things that the rest of the world threw away. She lives in the things the world decided it did not need. Amethyst has organized her interior life around defective objects because she identifies with them. The trash is not a joke about her being messy. The trash is her thesis statement. The reason she is so generous to characters with damaged origins, including the corrupted gems, including the off-colors, including Steven when he is being needy and difficult, is that her own house is built out of those very objects. Garnet's room, the third you ever see, is a panorama of waterfalls and hands. The walls are made of countless enormous hands that emerge from the rock and gesture and gather and hold. The room is full of waterfalls and steady noise. It is the only one of the 3 rooms that feels, structurally, like a body. Hands rising out of stone, water moving in regular rhythm, points of light that turn out to be eyes. Garnet, the show eventually clarifies, is a fusion, a relationship, made flesh. 2 gems who chose to stay merged and built a single self out of that choice. Her room is the geometry of merging. 2 of everything, paired and overlapped, walking together. The room implies that Garnet is, on the inside, the experience of being looked at by yourself and reached for by yourself, of being 2 pairs of hands, of being a body that is also a conversation. The show only takes you in there a couple of times, but each time, the same idea reasserts itself. Garnet is the room. 2 beings who have decided to be one place, and the place is generous, steady, and uncluttered, because they did the work to make it that way. What the show does not show you is the inside of Steven's gem. He has one, he uses it, he projects from it, he heals with it, he eventually summons enormous pink projections out of it. But the room you see in the temple wall, that ought to be his, in the layout of the building, is mostly closed to him for years. The rooms that the temple holds in its center are Rose's, and Rose's room functions, at the few times Steven enters it, as a wish fulfillment chamber. It gives you whatever you can think of, however dangerous. The fact that Steven inherits the room that gives him whatever he wants, rather than a private space of his own that gives him a place to be, is itself a thesis. Steven did not get a room. He got a wish factory. He did not inherit a place to be alone in. He inherited a place that would rather give him a fantasy than let him be inconvenient. This is a problem from the first time he walks in there, and the show keeps coming back to that room precisely because it represents what is missing from his interior life. He never gets to retreat. He only ever gets to want and watch the room produce the result and live with the consequences. By the time the final stretch of the show arrives and Steven's emotional state has caught up with him, the absence of a real private room of his own is one of the answers to why he has nowhere to put it. The temple, as a building, also gives away a structural fact about the show's pacing. Each room is a hint about a character's interior, and the show drops you in there exactly when you are ready to read it. You see Pearl's room before you know what a pearl is, but the room teaches you. You see Amethyst's room before the kindergarten arc, but the room is already an explanation. You see Garnet's room before you know she is a fusion, and once you do, the hands and waterfalls reorganize. The show uses architecture as foreshadowing. That is the kind of detail that gets dismissed as production polish until you notice that the polish is teaching you the lore on a delay. None of the rooms are random. They are tiny portraits of people you have not yet learned to read. In the temple from the outside, the great seated figure with its 8 arms and 5 points and central crowned head is the show's own admission about where it is going. The figure is a fusion. The largest building in the show, the one Steven lives on top of, is the silhouette of more than one gem combining into a single shape. The architecture of the protagonist's home is a fusion. The show was telling you from the very first establishing shot that this story is about more than one being becoming one being, that it is about union as architecture, that the building itself is a proof of concept. The temple is what the show wants you to imagine the crystal gems can become if they trust each other. It is a vision of completed harmony drawn into the cliff face like a promise. The fact that the protagonist's house is literally a fusion is not set dressing. It is the thesis sentence of the show, in stone, behind every conversation. Look at it once with that in mind, and it is very hard to look at it any other way again. Now zoom out, away from the temple, down the stairs, across the boardwalk, into the car wash, and meet Greg Universe. Greg is the protagonist's father. He is a former rock musician who lives in a van behind the car wash he owns. He has long hair, a soft middle, a kind face, a guitar, and an enormous, unforced ability to say the warmest possible thing to his son in the moments when it would be easiest to say the wrong one. The theory people miss about Greg is not really a theory at all. It is that he is the single most carefully written character in the entire show, and that almost every emotional argument the series makes is being modeled, quietly, by the man who lives in the van. The starting premise, the canon premise, is that Greg met Rose Quartz at a concert in Beach City when he was very young. He toured, he fell in love with her, he gave up his career, he stayed, he learned to live with the fact that the woman he loved was a thousands of years old alien who would, in becoming a mother, cease to exist as he had known her. He agreed to that trade. He raised the child. The child has his last name, has his temperament, has his hair, and is also half of a being he can never fully understand. The show takes this premise and refuses to flinch from any of its weight. Greg is not played for laughs as a sad clown widower. He's not played for prestige drama as a tragic figure. He is played with enormous patience as a man who has done the work to find a way to love what he has been given, even though he was not at any point in charge of the terms. Read this way. Almost every Greg scene is a tiny demonstration of what loving a non-human being looks like when you take it seriously. He does not romanticize Rose. He does not lie about her. When Steven asks him hard questions, he answers them honestly, including the ones about whether Rose was a good person. The show has him sit with the discomfort of the answers. He does not insist that Rose was a saint. He does not insist that she was a villain. He sits with the idea that she was complicated, and that he loved her anyway. The show is using Greg deliberately as the model for how Steven is going to have to relate to his mother once he learns the truth. If Greg can love the woman who left him a child and a memory and a haystack of unanswered questions, Steven can love the rebellion leader who left him a complicated political legacy and a body shaped like an apology. The show is teaching the lesson through the father before it teaches it through the son. There is also a smaller, sweeter detail that lives under every Greg scene, which is that he never tells Steven what to do. He offers, he models, he listens, he does not order. The few times he actually has to lay down a rule, the show treats it as a small earthquake. Greg is what a parent looks like when they have decided, very early, that their child belongs to themselves rather than to them. The gems struggle with this. They try to teach Steven how to be a crystal gem, how to fight, how to use his powers. Greg does not try to teach Steven how to be Greg. He teaches him how to be Steven by treating him as already Steven from the beginning. In the way the gems sometimes fail, and the way Greg almost never does, the show implies that the difference between parenting and ownership is the willingness to let the person you love become a stranger to you. Greg lets that happen, daily. The gems are visibly learning how, all season long. The most famous Greg scenes, the ones that the fandom returns to most often, are the moments of him sitting on the steps with Steven, the moments of him singing about the universe, the moments of him explaining, in a quiet voice, that he has always loved him. The exact form of these scenes varies. The shape is consistent. Greg, sitting close, speaking softly, telling Steven a true thing about love or the past or the future or himself. The show has done this so many times that it functions by the end like a structural element. When the story is about to demand something enormous of Steven, Greg gets a scene with him first. That is the rhythm. It is the show's way of placing the emotional foundation under the building before the building has to bear weight. You cannot do the third act of Steven Universe without those scenes, and the show knows this, and built them into the chassis from the beginning. There is a quieter detail worth lingering on, which is that the show never asks Greg to perform conventional masculinity. He is fat. He is gentle. He cries. He sings about feelings. He is sometimes silly. He is allowed to be in love with someone who outranks him in every conceivable way, and he is allowed to talk about it openly, and the show never makes him pay for that openness. In the visual culture of children's television, where dads are still very often punchlines, Greg is one of the most carefully drawn counterexamples in the medium. The writers understood, early, that the central thesis of the show, which is that love is a discipline rather than a feeling, would die in the cradle if the father was a joke. So they made him a thoughtful man with a generous interior life, and they let him sing, and they let him cry, and they let him be wrong, and they let him apologize, and they let him stay. None of that was random either. The show needed a father who could model the lesson and built him on purpose. There is also the matter of the van. Greg lives by choice in a small van behind a car wash. He has, by the show's later seasons, become wealthy. The show makes this explicit. He won a settlement. He has money. He still lives in the van. The fandom has had years to come up with reasons. The reading the show seems to be inviting is that the van is the place where his life with Rose happened, that it is the only home he ever lived in with her, that he is, in his quiet way, refusing to move on from the location of his happiness. He cleans the van. He maintains it. He plays his guitar in it. He sleeps in it on the cool nights. Greg is not eccentric for living there. He is a man performing a continuous private ritual of fidelity to a woman who has been gone for over a decade by refusing to leave the address where he was last year she was in his life. The show never says this. The show implies it through repetition. He'd go anywhere. He stays in the van. He stays in the place where she could find him if she could come back. That is not set dressing. It is grief, lived in by a man who has decided with full intention to be patient with grief for the rest of his life. By the time the show gets to the movie and to Steven Universe future, Greg's function is so well established that the writers can use him as a stabilizer. Whenever Steven's reality starts to come apart, the show puts him near his father, and it does not need to over-explain why this is the move. Greg is the steady fact under the show, the proof that a complicated loss can become a generous life, the model the show wants Steven to see and the model the show wants you to see. None of that emerged late. It was being built into him from the first scene where he hugged his son too tightly and apologized for the awkwardness of the hug. The man in the van is a thesis statement. Pearl is a swordswoman. The show establishes this very early. She summons a holographic blade from her gem. She moves through choreographed forms with an exactness that the animation makes a point of selling, and she takes the responsibility of training Connie, Steven's human best friend, very personally. There is a famous song associated with her training routine, one of those quiet musical episodes the show pulls off so often, in which Pearl sings, while Connie practices, about a knight pledging her sword to a beloved sovereign and dying so that the sovereign can survive. The chorus, which the show repeats with small variations across the episode, is essentially the line, "You do it for her, you do it for her." It is gorgeously composed. It is also, on the second listen, a confession. Pearl is teaching Connie to be a Pearl. That is the red. She is teaching a small human girl who has chosen Steven the way Pearl once chose Rose, the discipline of devoting your body and your skill to the survival of someone you love. The song dramatizes this as noble. The show is letting Pearl say something honest, and only later asking you to notice how dangerous what she is saying actually is. A Pearl is, by the rules of Homeworld, made for one purpose, and that purpose is to serve. Pearl is the first gem in the series to break that rule, in the sense that she chose to keep loving Rose after Rose's death and to redirect her purpose towards Steven. She has, in a sense, succeeded in being a free Pearl. But the way she models freedom for Connie when she teaches her is to teach her to use that freedom to subordinate herself again. this time to a child. Pearl is passing on the only template she knows for love, and the template is, in its bones, the template that her oppressors built into her. The episode the song lives in is also doing something more specific. Pearl is, during the training sequence, remembering Rose. The show overlays the present and the past in the editing, so that Pearl's lessons to Connie are visually paralleled with Pearl's own training under Rose, the lessons she received about how to fight and about who she was fighting for. The song is, in that overlay, partly a love letter to a dead woman. You do it for her, Pearl is singing, and she's half talking to Connie about Steven and half talking to herself about Rose. The show is letting Pearl do, in a song to a child, what she cannot do in a conversation with another adult. She is processing the loss, the role, and the way the loss has shaped the role, by handing the role down to someone else. None of that emotional content is hidden. It is sung out loud. The show is just confident enough to put it in a song about sword training because it knows you will trust the genre and not feel ambushed by the weight. Now look at what Pearl actually fights with. Her weapon is a spear that she pulls from her gem. The gem itself is set in her forehead. The show is making, with a clarity it rarely calls attention to, the point that Pearl's weapon comes out of her brain. Garnet's weapons come from her hands. Amethyst's weapon, a whip, comes from her chest. Steven's weapon, a shield, comes from his stomach. Each weapon emerges from the part of the body that the character leads with. Pearl thinks. She analyzes. She overthinks. She plans. Her spear is the externalization of her intellect. Garnet acts. She decides. Her gauntlets are the externalization of decision. Amethyst feels. Her whip cracks out from the center of her body, the seat of feeling. Steven defends. His shield emerges from the gut, where his mother's gem sits, and where his protective instinct lives. The placement of the gems on the bodies is not random, and neither are the weapons. The show is encoding personality into anatomy from the first time you see each character summon, and once you notice it, you cannot stop noticing it. The placement matters elsewhere too. Lapis Lazuli, who you meet later, has her gem on her back. She summons wings of water. She runs, she retreats, she carries other people. Her gem is on her back because her instinct is to flee and to use her power to escape. Peridot has her gem on her forehead, like Pearl. And like Pearl, she is the thinker of her court, the technician, the planner. Bismuth has her gem on her chest, and her power, the ability to forge into shape, is a thing she puts her whole heart into, sometimes to her own ruin. The show drew the design of every gem, so that the placement of the gem tells you what the character leads with, and the weapon they pull is the part of themselves they want you to see when they want to be taken seriously. The show built a visual grammar that you read without knowing you were reading it, and that grammar is consistent across the entire run. Return to Pearl. The reason her devotion to Rose is so painful, and the reason the show treats it with such care, is that Pearl is a Pearl who escaped, but who has not escaped the shape of her own training. She fights with her intellect because that is what a Pearl always did. She serves. She organizes. She makes the home function. She braids Connie's hair. She makes Steven's breakfast. She corrects in a brittle way when she feels the household is slipping out of alignment. Pearl is performing the job she was made for with a different family in a different house on a different planet, and her grief is partly about the fact that her freedom did not actually free her from the form of her bondage. She still does it for someone. She has simply changed who the someone is. The show puts all of this on the screen long before it explains a single thing about Pearls. You are watching her behavior, you are reading her room, you are listening to her song, you are looking at her weapon, and you are already getting the answer. By the time the show finally has Pearl say, out loud, who she was made for, the sentence does not feel like exposition. It feels like a permission slip you have been waiting to give her. The audience knew. The show was confident enough to make us know. Pearl was designed to be a pearl, and the show has been showing you the shape of that since the first episode. There is one final detail worth resting on, which is that Pearl, alone among the main crystal gems, has been written as a queer character in a way that the show eventually makes explicit. She loved Rose. She loved her romantically. The show finally says this out loud in the later seasons, and most fans had been reading it that way for years. The reason the song You Do It For Her hits so hard is that when Pearl sings it, she is singing about a woman she loved and who is gone. The song's chorus is, in its first recording, about a knight dying for a queen. The episode is, in its narrative, about a child learning a craft. The show puts those two readings in the same song and lets you decide which one you are crying about. The writers were unafraid to let Pearl be in love, and unafraid to let the love be the engine of her grief, and unafraid to make the audience listen to her sing about it for several minutes while a little girl learned to hold a sword. Nothing about that scene is random. It is one of the most honest pieces of television the show ever made, and it is sitting inside a children's cartoon as if it belongs there. The argument the show is making all the way through is that it does. Garnet, the tall, calm, gauntleted gem who leads the team after Rose's absence, is a fusion. The show withholds this fact for almost the entire first season, then drops it in an episode in which she comes apart, mid-combat, into the two gems who make her. The two are Ruby and Sapphire, and the show frames their separation as a small disaster. Two parts of the same person briefly forced to look at each other in the eyes from across an open distance. The reveal does several things at once, but the one this chapter is interested in is this. The show, from the first episode, has been presenting its leader as a single person, and the person has been a relationship in disguise. Garnet is not a gem. Garnet is two gems who chose. Once you understand that, every scene she has ever been in changes shape. Start with the design. Garnet is taller than the others, broader, more grounded. She wears visors that hide her three eyes, a detail the show only finally pays off when you see her unfused and realize that one of her components has one eye and the other has two. She speaks in measured sentences, almost never raises her voice, and has a slightly delayed quality to her timing, as if there is always a fractional consultation happening between two beings before the answer comes out. The show animates this consistently. Garnet's body language from the first frame is the body language of two people sharing a single mouth and waiting to agree before speaking. You do not consciously notice this in early viewings. You feel it. The show is using animation as foreshadowing for a piece of lore that it has not yet introduced. The famous moment, the one that the fandom has spent years quoting and remixing, is the song the show built around her, the one in which Garnet finally explains what she is, after refusing to fall apart in front of a homeworld official who has spent the episode trying to humiliate her by calling her a defect. The argument the song makes in plain language is that she is not two gems pretending to be one. She is not a costume. She is not a trick. She is the experience of love, made walking. She is what happens when two people decide to be one place. The show puts this in a song and a fight sequence simultaneously, and the song wins the fight. Garnet defeats the antagonist by being able to explain herself out loud. That is the entire mechanic. The villain breaks because Garnet's existence cannot be insulted into pieces. That moment is the thesis sentence of the show. The case the series is making, from the first episode all the way through to Steven Universe Future, is that fusion is a metaphor for relationship, that fusion is a thing two beings choose moment by moment, that fusion is sometimes a mistake when it is coerced, that fusion is a wonder when it is consensual, and that the best version of two beings together is the version that does not lose its members in the process. Garnet is the show's working proof of concept. Two gems who fell in love. Two gems who chose. Two gems who stayed. The show keeps inventing reasons to take them apart so that you can see how much work the staying takes. It is not effortless. The show is careful to make this clear. Ruby and Sapphire fight. They have very different temperaments. Ruby is impulsive and loud and quick. Sapphire is precise and cool and slow. Garnet is what those temperaments produce when they decide to listen to each other for long enough to find the shared rhythm. The fight scenes, the dance scenes, the quiet scenes, all of them are demonstrations of the daily labor of being two people, in love, who have decided to be together as one being. Now look at how the show uses Garnet around Steven. Garnet is, of the three crystal gems, the one who treats him most consistently like a person. She does not coddle him. She does not overcorrect him. She gives him advice in measured sentences. She tells him things she is not supposed to tell him when the situation requires it, and refuses to tell him things when refusing is the kinder act. She is, in essence, the steadiest adult presence in his life, and the show is unsubtle about why. Garnet is, in the show's logic, what it looks like when two people have chosen to be present every day. Steven has lost a mother. Garnet is what a steady, chosen, present relationship looks like in a person, and the show is letting Steven very gently learn from that model. Garnet is showing Steven how to be the kind of person who stays, by being that kind of person near him every day for years. The color design of Garnet is also load-bearing. Ruby is red, Sapphire is blue. Garnet is a deep magenta that the show keeps locating between the two. Her skin is, by the visual mathematics of the show, the product of red and blue. Garnet's color is itself a constant reminder that she is the joining of two beings, and the show drew her that way on purpose. None of the crystal gems have a color that arbitrary. Pearl is a soft white blue. Amethyst is purple, in the sense that an amethyst gemstone is purple, Steven is pink. Garnet is the only character whose color is the literal result of mixing the colors of her components. The show is encoding her nature into her skin. There is a sweeter detail still, and it lives in how Garnet talks about her own existence. She refers to herself in the show as the embodiment of a relationship. She says, explicitly in a few key episodes, that she is love made physical. The show plays this without irony. The writers wanted to make sure that Garnet's existence could be defended in the simplest possible terms by Garnet herself, so that no other character on the show would ever be allowed to define her down to a smaller thing. Whenever a character tries to insult her, Garnet has the sentence ready. She is what love is in a body. The villain or the bigot can dispute it, but they cannot take it away from her. The show built into her a kind of philosophical armor that no other character on the show is given so completely. Garnet always knows what she is, and the show wants you to admire that. This is also why the moments when Garnet does fall apart hit so hard. The few times she splits across the run of the show are the few times the structural promise breaks, and the show treats each of those moments as a small grief. The show wants you to understand very early that the relationship that is Garnet is not invincible. It is strong because it has been chosen repeatedly with effort for thousands of years. The show keeps showing you what happens when the effort fails, briefly, in a fight or in a misunderstanding or in a moment of overwhelm, and the show keeps showing you how Ruby and Sapphire find their way back. The writers did not want Garnet to be a metaphor for an effortless union. They wanted her to be a metaphor for a worked union, and the difference is the entire ethic of the show. Love is a discipline. Garnet is what the discipline looks like when it succeeds. Now extend the argument to the rest of the series. Once the show has established that fusion is the metaphor, every later fusion in the series becomes a comment on it. Stevani, the fusion of Stephen and Connie, becomes a statement about consent and identity, since the show is unusually careful to clarify that fusion between a human and a gem is, in the moral structure of the universe, a thing both parties have to want. Sugalite, the fusion of Garnet and Amethyst, is what happens when two beings come together without discipline, all power and no patience. Sardonyx, the fusion of Garnet and Pearl, is what happens when one party seeks fusion for vanity rather than need, and the show treats that as a small ethical failure. Malachite, the fusion of Lapis and Jasper, is fusion as abuse, two beings welded together by trauma and held in place by spite. Each of these is a different argument the show is making about the metaphor. Garnet, the original, is the version where it works. The other fusions exist so that you can measure her against them. The show is not just telling you that love is hard. It is showing you, with a structural rigor you rarely see in children's television, all of the ways the same metaphor can go right and wrong, and asking you to think about which form of union you would want to be inside of. None of that is random. The show built the whole vocabulary around her and then used the vocabulary to ask the question that the rest of the series is trying to answer. Amethyst is the loud one. She is the one with the messy hair, the snack habit, the bad attitude, the easy laugh, the shape-shifting trick, the hidden ache. The show plays her for a long time as the comedic counterweight to the rigor of Pearl and the discipline of Garnet, the slacker who makes the team feel like a household instead of a paramilitary unit. The show was using comedy as cover, and almost everything funny about Amethyst is, on second viewing, the externalization of a wound the show keeps slowly opening across the run. The thing the show implies about her and eventually says out loud is that Amethyst was made on Earth in the wrong shape, in the wrong place, after the war was already over, and that she has spent the entire run trying to make peace with being something the universe did not need. To unpack that, you have to talk about the kindergarten. The kindergarten is the place, somewhere in the desert, where Homeworld's invasion forces planted the seeds of new gems by drilling injectors into the Earth and using the planet's biomass to grow soldiers. The case the show makes, again and again, is that this process is, in moral terms, an extraction. It treats the planet as a resource. It treats the new gems as products. It leaves the land barren when it is finished. The crystal gems halted the process before it could devour Earth. They did not, however, halt it cleanly. Some of the seeds had already finished. Amethyst is one of those. She was made on Earth in the kindergarten, late, after most of the others had been broken or stopped, and the show is unsubtle about the fact that the crystal gems found her in the dirt and chose to take her home rather than leave her there. They raised her. She is, in the strict sense, the youngest member of the team. She is also the only member of the team who was made by the enemy whose rebellion she belongs to. That contradiction is her central wound. The episode the show finally returns to the kindergarten in, after years of careful setup, is one of the bluntest pieces of writing in the series. Amethyst walks through the hole she came out of, in the rock face. She stands in the empty space where she was grown. She tries to laugh it off and cannot. Her entire sense of self has been organized, for thousands of years, around the fact that she is, in her own reading, a leftover. The show resists making her tragic. It does not soften the wound by giving her a tidy redemption. It lets her have the wound. Her behavior, the snacking, the destruction of her own belongings, the volatile temper, the tendency to lash out at Pearl, the tendency to mother Stephen in a slightly chaotic way, is all of it the shape of a person who has been told, by her own origin, that she is not supposed to be here, and who is determined to occupy as much space as possible anyway. The famous song associated with her is one in which she lays out, in plain words, the shape of the wound. She is, by homeworld standards, the wrong size. She is the wrong shape. She did not bake long enough. The other amethysts on homeworld are taller, slimmer, more uniform. Her body, the small, broad, soft, purple shape that has been on screen since the first episode, is the visible evidence of her supposed defectiveness. Once you know this, every joke the show has ever made about her size is recontextualized. She has been the punchline for thousands of years inside her own head, and the laugh tracks she generates for the audience are, in part, the laugh tracks she has been generating for herself to make it bearable. The show built the comedy into her precisely so it could land the grief later, and the comedy is the grief, all the way through. Now connect Amethyst to Stephen. The show is careful to position them, again and again, as the two characters who are closest in age and emotional register. Amethyst, despite being thousands of years old, is the youngest gem on the team in functional terms, since she was made last and raised by the others. Stephen, of course, is the actual child. The show is showing you what it looks like when two beings, both made by powers larger than themselves, both raised inside the same household, both carrying the suspicion that they are partly an embarrassment to their family, find each other and become each other's siblings in the most useful sense. Amethyst is the one Stephen can be undisciplined with. Amethyst is the one who teaches him that you are allowed to be loud. The show implies that the lesson is mutual. Stephen teaches Amethyst that you do not have to apologize for taking up space. The two of them are, structurally, each other's permission slips, and the show is patient enough to let you watch the lesson get exchanged in 100 small scenes. The Sugalite arc, where Amethyst fuses with Garnet to form a massive, reckless, joyful, dangerous fusion that the team eventually has to stop, is the show's most direct argument about her appetite for being seen. Sugalite is enormous. Sugalite is loud. Sugalite is the version of Amethyst that has finally been given the size she always wanted. The show treats this as both liberation and warning. Amethyst is allowed, briefly, to feel as big as she has always felt small, and the consequences are immediately destructive. The show does not want you to read this as a story about an addict losing control. It wants you to read it as a story about an unmet need being temporarily met, and the cost of meeting it without the discipline of the relationship that Garnet has built. The show keeps making this point. Power without relationship is dangerous. Size without consent is dangerous. Sugalite is what Amethyst has been quietly wanting to be, and the show is honest enough to make you watch her enjoy it, and then honest enough to make you watch the cost. The other detail worth lingering on is that Amethyst is the only main crystal gem on the team who was not present for the war on Earth. Pearl fought, Garnet fought, Bismuth, when she appears, fought. Amethyst was still in the ground. She was a seed in the dirt, while the people she now lives with were dying for the world she grew out of. The show implies that she has been carrying a survivor's guilt that she does not have the right to carry, and a refugee's gratitude that she does not have the right to feel. All at the same time, because she was simultaneously made by the invasion and rescued by the rebels who stopped the invasion. The show is unusually careful to write her as if both halves of her origin are her real story. She is not, in the show's logic, a child of the rebellion. She is a child of the conquest who was raised by the rebellion. The two are not the same thing, and the show wants you to notice the difference. The reason none of this feels improvised comes from how carefully it was built. The shape-shifting is a metaphor for not being comfortable in your body. The snacking is a metaphor for filling a hole. The trash room is a metaphor for self-image. The friendship with Stephen is a metaphor for accepting your own existence by being a witness to someone else's. The song about being the wrong shape is a metaphor for itself. The show did not invent Amethyst as a comic relief, who later got a backstory. The show built the comic relief out of the backstory from the beginning, and let you laugh for years before showing you what you had been laughing at. None of that is improvised. It is one of the most carefully written character arcs in modern animation, and it is hiding inside a purple cartoon gem who likes burgers. Now move to the strangest, sweetest detail in the entire series, the one that most consistently gets dismissed as filler and turns out to be one of the most interesting metaphors the show ever generated, the watermelon Stevens. The episode in question, which arrives somewhere in the middle stretch of the series, sets up a small premise. Steven, at a beach picnic with Connie and his family, plants watermelon seeds. A while later, the watermelons that grow from those seeds turn out to be shaped, vaguely like him, with limbs and faces, and the round bald heads of small green humanoids. The show plays this for laughs at first, then does something stranger. It treats the watermelons as people. It treats them with care. It builds a small civilization out of them. It returns to them episodes later, with consequences. The thing the show is doing, very quietly, is asking a question about Steven's powers that it will not answer in plain language for years. Steven has the ability to bring things to life. He has it because he has his mother's gem. His mother could heal. His mother could give life to inanimate matter at the boundary of her own essence, and Steven, by inheritance, can do the same. The lion is one example. The watermelons are another. The pumpkin in the later seasons is another. Each time the show puts him near a thing that ought to be inert and lets him pour part of himself into it, the thing wakes up. Steven's nature as a half-human child of a diamond is essentially generative. He grows. He animates. He gives. And the show is using these small, inert objects, the watermelons, the lion, the pumpkin, to teach you something about him that he has not yet learned about himself, which is that everything he loves will absorb some of him, and some of what absorbs him will not let go. That is the case the show is making. The watermelon Stevens are not a joke about his ego, even though the show is happy to let you laugh at the visual. They are a small early demonstration of what the show will, in its final stretch, treat as a serious moral problem. Steven cannot stop himself from being absorbed by the people and things around him. He gives himself away, in small increments, all the time. He gives himself to the watermelons by accident. He gives himself to the lion by extension of his mother's gift. He gives himself to the corrupted gems through his healing. He gives himself to Connie, to his father, to the team, in 1,000 small daily acts of attention. The show is, in the watermelon episode, planting the seed in the most literal possible sense of the thesis it will harvest in Steven Universe future. Steven is a being who has been giving since he was born, and the world has been taking, and at some point the bill comes due. The watermelons themselves are also doing structural work. They eventually rebel. They build a society. They develop a culture. They eventually, in a later episode, attempt to defend their home and attempt to kill people they perceive as threats. The show is making, in miniature, the point that anything Steven brings to life will eventually develop its own will, and that will is not always going to be aligned with his preferences. The watermelons are not a comic interlude. They are a tiny political experiment. The show is using them to ask what happens when a benevolent creator creates a population without thinking it through, and the answer, in the show's logic, is that the population will, sooner or later, want something other than what the creator wanted for them. Read this way. The watermelons are a tiny rehearsal for what the crystal gems are, for what the diamonds did to the gems, for what the diamonds did to colonized planets, for the entire moral question the show is examining at scale. They are the show working out, in a sandbox, the consequences of creating beings you're not prepared to be responsible for. The episode handles this with extraordinary delicacy. The watermelons are not villains. The show is careful not to vilify them. They are doing what beings that have been brought into the world do, which is try to maintain their own existence. The show is asking Steven, and asking you, to take responsibility for what you create, even when what you create has decided it does not want what you wanted for it. Steven's life is going to be full of moments like that. Moments where a being he has brought into the story, by his attention or his love or his power, will decide it has a will of its own, and the will is not going to be the will he hoped for. The watermelons are the first lesson. Lion is the second. The corrupted gems will be the third. By the time the show gets to the 5th season, Steven is dealing with this dynamic on a planetary scale, and the show has been training him, and you, with watermelons. There is a tiny visual detail the show uses in these scenes that is worth noticing. When the watermelons appear, the color palette of the scene cools. The show pulls back the saturation, lengthens the shadows, and lets the watermelons sit in a slightly more melancholy light than the rest of the show. That is not a coincidence. The show is signaling, through animation, that what looks like a joke is being treated, by the camera, as serious. The animators were given an instruction, probably very early in development, to play the watermelons as people. Full stop, and to let the audience figure out the rest. The result is a series of episodes that, on a casual watch, register as silly, and on a careful watch, register as the show working out its central thesis with a population of small green melons. There is also the small but emotionally relevant detail of the colors. The watermelons are pink on the inside and green on the outside. They are, in a literal sense, the color of Stephen's mother on the inside, and the color of Earth's vegetation on the outside. The show is showing you Stephen externalized. He is, by birth, a being whose interior is the color of pink diamond and whose exterior is the color of the planet he was made on. The watermelons are him, viewed from outside, displayed for the camera, asking what it would mean to be a population of small Stephens who only inherited the inside, the gift, the pink, without the discipline of the outside, the earth, the human, the patience. The show is showing you what Stephen would be if he were only the diamond half of himself, with no earth, no Greg, no human upbringing. The answer, in the show's logic, is that he would be a small green being with no language for his own desires, who would defend his home by force and not understand why anyone was alarmed. The show is making, in the watermelons, the case for why the human half of Stephen matters, and that this is the case the entire series is making in a slightly different form, every week, so the watermelons are not random either. They are a thesis demonstration. They are a sandbox. They are a small green chorus of beings asking the same question the show will eventually ask of its protagonist. What do you owe the people you have brought into existence? By being yourself. The show, in its final stretch, will answer that question for Stephen by making him answer it for the corrupted gems, for the colonized planets, for the diamonds, for his own mother's legacy. The watermelons are where the show started to figure out what the question was going to be. They are one of the strangest and most quietly serious metaphors in modern television, and they spent most of the show's run getting dismissed as a one-off bit. That is exactly what the show wanted, and the bit was load-bearing all along. Connie Mahaswaran is the human girl Stephen befriends early in the first season of the series. She is, on the surface, a perfectly normal 12-year-old, daughter of two professionals, slightly lonely, smart, careful, polite. The show gives her a backpack, a pair of glasses for the first stretch of the series, a passion for books, and a slightly anxious posture around adults. Connie is one of the most carefully written audience surrogates in modern animation, and almost every theory about her that lives in the fandom is actually a theory about the show's relationship to its own audience. Start with how the show introduces her. She has been waiting for an entire year to meet Stephen again, because of a small interaction she had with him on the beach in which he saved her from a passing bubble. He does not remember her. She has remembered him for a year. The show is telling you in her first scene what she will spend the next several years embodying. Connie pays attention. She remembers. She holds on to small kindnesses long after the giver has forgotten the gift. The show is going to spend years making this trait load-bearing. Connie is the character who will recall the thing Stephen said 3 seasons ago and quietly hand it back to him when he needs it. The show is telling you in the first scene that the rest of the run will work this way. Then there is the matter of the books. Connie is very specifically a reader. The show is unsubtle about this. She carries books around. She references books in conversation. Her favorite series, The Unending Stories About a Girl and Her Sword, is presented to you as one of the engines of her imagination. And the show takes the time to invent the books, the covers, the basic plot, even a televised adaptation she watches with Stephen. Connie is the character who learns by reading, and the show is using her throughout the run as a quiet vehicle for the idea that knowledge, applied with imagination, is what allows a human being to stand beside a gem and be useful. She trains with Pearl, she becomes proficient with a sword, she fights alongside the gems, and she does all of this from a starting point of human limitations, by reading, watching, asking, practicing. The show is not subtle about the point. Connie is what the audience would be if the audience were the kind of person who took the show's lessons seriously, and went out the next morning to learn something. The point deepens when you look at the way the show uses her in the larger plot. Connie is the first non-gem to be present at gem events. She's the first non-gem to be invited to a gem mission. She is the first non-gem to fuse with a gem. She is, by a careful series of small steps that the show plans across multiple seasons, the bridge between humanity and the crystal gems. The show is making a structural argument about her. The crystal gems came to Earth thousands of years ago to protect the planet. Their relationship with the people of the planet has, for most of that time, been distant. Connie, simply by being Stephen's best friend, by being present, by being a witness, is repairing that distance from the human side. The rebellion Rose started was incomplete. The rebellion saved Earth. It did not, by itself, integrate the gems with the people of Earth. Connie is doing that work. The show treats her not as a token human, but as the proof of the next phase of the rebellion. Now consider the fusion. Stevonnie, the fusion of Steven and Connie, is the show's most carefully written fusion. The show takes considerable trouble to make clear, the first time it happens, that this is a thing both parties wanted, that this is a thing both parties consented to, that this is not a thing either of them entered without thinking about. The show is using Stevonnie to model something almost no other piece of children's television has been willing to model in plain terms, which is that intimacy between two beings has to be mutual, ongoing, and freely chosen. The show writes Stevonnie as a single being with a single voice and a single body, and gives them a name, a wardrobe, an inner life, and a small political existence in Beach City and in the larger gem world. The show is, in essence, telling you that the merging of two beings who love each other produces a third being who is allowed to exist on their own terms, and who is allowed to be experienced by the audience as such. This is one of the most rigorous treatments of intimacy in a children's show that the medium has ever produced, and the writers built Stevonnie precisely so they could make the case at all. The detail that gets less attention is how the show writes Connie's parents. Dr. Maheswaran and her husband are stricter than the average cartoon parents. They are not played as villains. They are played as people who love their daughter and are afraid for her in the precise ways that intelligent adults are afraid for their children. The show has them disapprove of Steven, then come to terms with him, then come to terms with the gems, then come to terms with the fact that their daughter is part of a story bigger than their household. By including them and writing them carefully, the show is making the case that becoming a person who can stand beside the gems is not a private decision Connie can make alone. It is a thing she has to negotiate with her family. The show treats the negotiation as serious and the parents as real. The writers did not want to give Connie a magical free pass to the gem world by killing or dismissing her parents. They wanted her to have to do the work of explaining herself to the people who raised her because that work is the actual ethic of the show. None of that is incidental. It is the show's politics, lived in by a child negotiating with her mother. There is also a small but persistent theory in the fandom that Connie's name is a deliberate echo of the word constancy, that she is the constant in Steven's life, the still point under the rotating chaos of gem affairs. The show does not confirm this, but the show writes her that way. She is the one character he can rely on to be exactly who he expects her to be. She is the one character whose feelings about him do not change shape when she learns new information about him. When the reveal about his mother lands, Connie does not change her opinion of Steven. When the reveal about his powers expands, Connie does not change her opinion of Steven. When Steven himself starts to come apart in the final stretch, in Steven Universe Future, Connie is the one whose presence does not destabilize. She is, in a precise sense, the still place he can stand in. The show built her this way on purpose because Steven was going to need a still place, and the still place needed to be a human being. The fight between them, when it eventually comes, is one of the most quietly devastating sequences the show ever makes. Connie, late in the series, becomes frustrated with Steven for not telling her about a serious decision he has made about his future, and she withdraws her attention from him for a stretch of episodes. The show treats this as a serious wound. Steven, who has been used as the engine of every other character's healing for years, is not equipped to be on the other end of an absence from the person whose presence he has come to count on. Very late in the run, the show is finally letting Connie do the thing the show has been preparing for years. She is allowed to withhold. She is allowed to demand more of him. She is allowed to expect him to be honest with her the way he expects everyone else to be honest with him. The show wrote her this way from the beginning, so that when the moment came for her to set a boundary with him, the boundary would carry weight. It does. The recovery of the friendship, when it comes, is one of the most honest pieces of relationship writing in the show's whole catalog, and it would not work if the show had not been investing in her, line by line, for years. None of that is random. The audience's surrogate became the moral mirror on a schedule because the writers planned it that way. Lapis Lazuli is one of the most unsettling characters in the show, and one of the most quietly important. When she first appears, she is trapped inside a mirror, a flat, reflective surface that has been kept on a shelf by Pearl for an indefinite stretch of time. The show plays the introduction as gentle and almost sweet. The mirror talks. The mirror, the show eventually reveals, is a person. The gem inside the mirror has been awake the whole time, watching, unable to move, unable to leave, unable to be heard by the people who have been carrying her around as a tool. That is the premise the show opens her arc on, and the rest of her story across the run never stops being a meditation on what it means to be a captive. The reading the show keeps reaching for, without quite saying it as a thesis sentence, is that Lapis is the show's central image of trauma. She is what happens when a being is held still against her will for a long time, and then released into a world that has moved on without her. The show is not interested in giving her a clean recovery. Her release from the mirror does not heal her. Her arc with the team does not heal her. Her time on Earth, her terrible fusion with Jasper, her cohabitation with Peridot, her brief flight from the planet during the final invasion, none of these arcs end in a tidy moment of restoration. The show insists, quietly and consistently, that trauma is not a thing you finish processing. It is a thing you learn to live near. Start with the mirror. Lapis was, by her own account, picked up after the war on Earth ended, treated as wreckage, fitted into a tool by homeworld bureaucrats, and then carried for thousands of years as a polished surface that people looked into. The show is careful to make her describe this. She tells Steven in the episode of her release that she could see out, that she could hear, that she could not respond. The show is using the mirror not just as a plot device but as a precise metaphor. There is a kind of suffering that consists of being present in your own life and being denied the ability to participate in it. Lapis lived that for an extraordinary length of time. The show implies, without underlining it, that this experience is the foundation of every later decision she makes in the run, and that those decisions are all shaped by the same wound. She wants to leave. She wants to be alone. She does not trust collective spaces. She does not trust groups of gems who want to absorb her into their project, even when their project is liberation. Her instinct, all the way through, is to refuse to be a tool again, and that instinct is sometimes wise and sometimes self-destructive, and the show is unwilling to flatten either reading. The fusion with Jasper is the moment the show steps fully into its argument about her. Jasper, the muscular orange homeworld soldier who comes to Earth to capture the crystal gems, ends up at the bottom of the ocean fused with Lapis into a creature called malachite. The show writes this fusion as abusive in both directions. Lapis is, in her own account, the one holding the fusion in place. She uses Jasper's strength against Jasper, by using her own water powers to anchor the fusion under the sea and refusing to let go. Jasper, in her own account, is the one who proposed the fusion as a means of strength and is then unwilling to let it dissolve even when it becomes destructive. The show is showing you a fusion built out of two beings who both want to use the other one as a weapon, and the show treats the result as horrifying. Malachite is the dark mirror of Garnet. Garnet is two beings who chose to be one place out of love. Malachite is two beings who chose to be one place out of mutual will to power, and stayed there because neither was willing to lose. The show implies that this is one of the worst things two beings can do to each other, and Lapis, by spending months at the bottom of the ocean inside it, is being asked to carry the consequences for the rest of the run. When she finally escapes the fusion, the show is careful not to play her release as triumph. She is exhausted. She is unwell. She is afraid of her own appetite for control. Lapis has learned, in the worst possible way, that her instinct to dominate the relationship she enters is the shadow side of her instinct to escape captivity. She has the power to hold someone else in place because she once was held in place, and the temptation to invert the situation is, for her, almost irresistible. The show implies, without spelling it out, that this is one of the most common shapes of post-traumatic harm, and that the writers wanted to show it on screen without flinching. Lapis is not redeemed by being released. She is, slowly, taught how to live next to herself. The cohabitation with Peridot is the show's gentlest and most useful sequence in her arc. The two of them end up living together in a barn on the outskirts of Beach City. By an accident of plot that the show treats with great affection, they become close. They build a household. They keep each other company. Lapis, who is afraid of relationship in any form, allows Peridot to be near her, and Peridot, who is loud and inexperienced and brand new to the experience of being a free gem, allows Lapis to be quiet and to take up space without explanation. The show is showing you in the barn what slow recovery actually looks like, and the recovery does not involve any grand speeches or revelations. It involves two damaged gems sharing meteor-sized objects and growing vegetables that they cannot eat, and watching strange Earth television and slowly learning to assume the other one is going to be there in the morning. The show does not, in the strict sense, heal Lapis through this. It does, however, give her a place to be, and the show implies that for a being like her, a place to be is a kind of healing all on its own. The arc still does not end in restoration. When the threat of homeworld returns in earnest, Lapis flees. She takes the barn with her, into space, and leaves Earth and Peridot behind, because her terror of being captured again outweighs her trust in the people who have become her family. The show treats this as a real and serious wound. It does not vilify her. It does not insist that she should have stayed. It simply lets the wound exist. Later, she returns, and the return is not a clean reversal of the flight. It is a being who has been afraid, and has come back to the place she was afraid in, with no clean story to tell about why she left. The show, in writing her this way, is making one of the most adult statements it makes about trauma in the whole run. Sometimes a being you love will be unable to stay. Sometimes that same being will be able to come back. The coming back does not erase the leaving. The leaving does not erase the love. The relationship has to be lived in with both events held inside it. By the time the show ends and Steven Universe Future arrives, Lapis is presented as part of the beach city community with the rest of the off-planet refugees, in the school Steven helps to organize. She is more settled. She is not healed. She still wears the slightly tired look of a being who is making a real effort to stay near people. In her final stretches, the show is making the case that you can build a life next to your trauma without ever fully resolving it, and that the building of the life is itself the work. None of that is random. The show built her as a captive, watched her escape, watched her abuse, watched her flee, watched her return, and let each step carry its full weight. Lapis is the show's longest meditation on what survival actually looks like when survival does not get to be a clean arc. The show wanted that meditation on screen and built her to carry it. Peridot enters the show as a villain. That is the deliberate choice the writers make. She arrives on Earth as a homeworld technician, sent to check on the progress of an enormous buried weapon, and her early appearances frame her as the cold, competent face of the empire the Crystal Gems have spent the series running from. She speaks in clipped technical sentences. She uses homeworld jargon. She refers to the Crystal Gems by their model numbers. She is, in every sense the show is willing to imply, a small green bureaucrat with no obvious moral interior. And then, over the course of the show's middle stretch, she becomes one of its most beloved characters, in one of the most carefully written redemption arcs in modern animation. The theory worth lingering on is how she got there and why the show was confident enough to spend so long taking her apart and putting her back together. The first thing the show does, very quietly, is give her a body that does not fit the role. Peridot is small. She is short. She is round. She wears finger extensions that make her look taller and tipped helmets that make her look armored. But underneath the equipment, she is a small, soft, awkward shape. The show is signaling, from the first time you really see her, that she is going to have to be unpacked. The clothing is the role. The body underneath is the person. When the Crystal Gems eventually strip her of the finger extensions and the helmet, in a sequence that the show plays for comedy and then for pathos, what is left is a small green being with no apparent dignity who has to begin, from scratch, the work of being herself without the equipment that signified her place in the Empire. This is a metaphor for ideological deprogramming, and the show was patient enough to make it visible in her literal shape. Then there is the matter of how she learns to live with the Crystal Gems. The show does not, at any point, let her undergo a single epiphany. She does not have a moment in which she suddenly understands the rebellion. She does not have a moment in which she suddenly sees Steven as her friend, rather than her hostage. She has, instead, a series of small, frequent, uncomfortable conversations across many episodes, in which she is gradually exposed to a way of being that is not the one Homeworld trained her in. The show is making a real claim about how political conversion actually happens. It happens by repeated contact, not by lightning strikes. Peridot watches Steven be patient with her. She watches Amethyst eat her food without judgment. She watches Pearl try to teach her without contempt. She watches Garnet stand near her as a fusion. She lives next to people who treat her as worth their time, and slowly the role she came to Earth in starts to feel less natural than the role she's being invited into. The show implies, without preaching, that this is how minds get changed, in the actual world, by proximity, by dignity, by time. The episode in which Peridot finally refuses to obey Yellow Diamond is one of the show's quiet structural pivots. She is asked, over a long-range communication device by her highest superior, to confirm her loyalty and complete her mission. She refuses. The show frames the refusal not as a triumphant declaration of independence, but as a panicked, embarrassed, half-formed gesture by a small being who has finally realized, in the moment of being asked, that she does not actually believe what she has been trained to believe. She insults the diamond, accidentally, on impulse. The show wrote the moment that way on purpose, because conversion in the actual world is rarely dignified. People discover that they no longer believe a thing somewhere around the moment they are being asked to confirm that they do, and the discovery is often more like a stumble than a stand. Peridot stumbles into the rebellion. The show treats the stumble with enormous tenderness. The cohabitation with Lapis in the barn, already mentioned, is the show's portrait of what Peridot is like when she has been given the time and the space to become a person. She develops hobbies, she watches television, she becomes a passionate fan of a low-budget science fiction show, she builds robots out of junk. She learns to communicate with vegetables in a half-magical, half-goofy power. The show eventually lets her wield against actual giant rock monsters. The show is showing you what it looks like when an authoritarian functionary gets to retire and discover for the first time in their life that they have an interior. The interior turns out to be enthusiastic, intellectually omnivorous, slightly socially awkward, and capable of immense love. The show implies, again without spelling it out, that this is what people who have been trained to be tools usually look like when they are finally allowed to be people. They are not heroic, they are nerdy, they have hobbies, they write fan fiction, they are fans of small bad things, they are funny. The show is making, in Peridot, a quiet case against the idea that the only valid form of liberation is grand and serious. Sometimes liberation looks like discovering you have a favorite TV show. Now, look at what the show withholds. Peridot, despite her redemption arc, is never given the ability to fuse during her main arc. The show is explicit about this. Peridot tries, Peridot fails. The show implies, with care, that this is partly because she is not yet psychologically ready to merge with another being without losing herself, and partly because she has not yet built the trust with anyone that fusion would require. The show is treating fusion, in her case, as a metaphor for the kind of intimacy that requires a stable interior first. Peridot is still building her interior. She's still figuring out what she likes. She is still learning to be a being. The show implies that asking her to merge with another being before that work is done would be skipping a step. The writers understood this and refused to give her the easy victory. They wanted her arc to be about becoming a person, not about becoming a fusion, and they were willing to withhold the visual reward in order to keep the lesson honest. There is also a smaller detail that the show plays with consistently, which is Peridot's relationship to her own technical knowledge. She is, by homeworld standards, a brilliant engineer. The crystal gems treat her, when they finally let her be useful, as a kind of in-house technician for any mechanical problem that comes up. The show is making a sly comment about empire and labor. Peridot's skills, which were trained into her by Homeworld for the purpose of building weapons and managing colonies, are now being put to use, in the household, for the purpose of repairing washing machines and analyzing magical objects. The same skills, depending on what they are used for, are either tools of conquest or tools of community. This is one of the more politically interesting things the show does without underlining it. People who were trained to be functionaries of empire often have skills that, redirected, could serve other ends. Peridot is the show's quiet demonstration of that case. None of that is random either. The show built her exactly that way. By the time Steven Universe Future arrives, Peridot is presented as one of the most settled members of the post-war community, with a job, a friend group, a continuous goofy enthusiasm, and a slightly proud sense of having chosen the life she is now living. The show wanted her ending to be small and ordinary. She is not given a grand final moment. She is given a stable life. The show is suggesting, in the quietest possible way, that the goal of conversion is not a heroic transformation. The goal is a normal Tuesday in which the person you used to be no longer has any hold on you. Peridot gets that Tuesday. The show planned it that way from the moment it stripped off her finger extensions, and nothing in her arc was random. Now go underground, far underground, into the center of the earth, and meet the cluster. The cluster is the show's most ambitious metaphor and one of its most carefully built reveals. The premise, given to you slowly across the first 2 seasons, is that Homeworld, in the aftermath of losing the war for Earth, did not simply abandon the planet. They embedded, in the planet's core, a vast number of broken gem shards, with the intent that, given enough time, the shards would attempt to fuse with each other into a single entity of unimaginable size. The entity would, when it finally emerged, destroy the planet from the inside as it tried to assume a coherent shape. The cluster is, by Homeworld design, a slow doomsday device built from the corpses of the soldiers, who died on the wrong side of a war that they cannot remember losing. Take that in for a second, because the show takes the time to make you take it in. The cluster is not a weapon in the conventional sense. It is a desecration. It is the use of dead beings, against their will, as the material for a tool of vengeance. The case the show is making, from the first time you really understand what the cluster is that Homeworld's worldview is built on the assumption that gems are objects, and that objects can be used for any purpose the Empire chooses, including being used after they have been shattered to perform a task they would never have agreed to in life. The show treats this as a moral horror, and the more time it spends underground, the more clearly the horror is the point. Now consider the metaphor. The cluster is a forced fusion. It is the show's central moral category taken to its grimmest extreme. Fusion in the show, in its best form, is two beings choosing to be one place out of love. The cluster is millions of beings, who never consented, being squeezed into a single body by physical pressure and time. The show is showing you the structural opposite of Garnet. Garnet is two beings who chose. The cluster is millions of beings who could not. The show built the cluster precisely to be the moral mirror of its central metaphor, and the writers wanted you to understand that the same act, fusion, can be either the most loving thing two beings ever do together, or the most violent thing an empire ever does to a population, depending on consent. The show is, in this sense, doing one of the clearest pieces of political ethics it ever does, in the form of a buried geological threat. The episode in which Stephen finally encounters the cluster, deep in the center of the planet, is one of the show's most quietly devastating sequences. He does not fight it. He could not. The cluster, if it formed, would dwarf him on any scale you care to measure. The show instead has him speak to it. He calls out to the shards. He asks them to remember themselves. He asks them, in essence, to choose not to fuse. The show is, in the center of its own world, putting the central thesis on screen. The only thing that can stop a forced fusion is the act of individual will. The shards have to recognize themselves. They have to refuse to be assembled. They have to be reminded that they are people. The show puts this scene in the middle of an apocalyptic premise, and it makes the rescue not military but conversational. Stephen talks to the dead. The dead listen. The cluster briefly agrees not to come together. It is the show's clearest possible statement of its own ethic. Even in the center of the worst moral act in the universe, the answer is to address the victims as people, and to ask them to remember themselves. There is a smaller but devastating detail in the same sequence, which is that the shards, when Stephen reaches them, are confused. They do not remember the war. They do not remember being shattered. They do not remember having been people. The show is making clear that the worst thing Homeworld did to them was not the shattering itself, but the time. They have been broken so long and pressed so close to other shards that the line between any one gem and the next has worn down. They are, in essence, the moral residue of a war that has been forgotten by everyone except its victims. The show treats this with extraordinary care. Stephen does not lecture them. He does not impose a story on them. He sits with them. He listens to them. He gives them the room to discover, for themselves, that they were once people. This is the only way the show is willing to treat trauma at scale, by refusing to do the remembering for the victims, and by insisting that any healing has to come from the victims themselves, on their own time in their own language. The show then does something remarkable. The cluster, having been talked down, is not erased. It is bubbled in the show's standard mode of containment, and left in the center of the planet. It still exists. It still contains the millions of shards. It is, in a sense, still the show's central wound, just one that has been put into a stable form so that the world can continue to live around it. The show refuses to give itself the easy victory. The cluster is not destroyed. The shards are not restored to their original bodies. The world is not undone. The show implies that some kinds of harm can only be contained, not reversed, and that the moral work of containment is itself the most that anyone can offer the dead. The bubble is, in this sense, a kind of grave. The cluster is being held still, with care, because there is no possible way to make the harm not have happened. The show is unwilling to pretend otherwise, and it is unwilling to give Stephen the magical reset button that a less rigorous show would have offered. Now extend the metaphor outward. The cluster is, in the show's logic, not a one-off threat. It is a structural truth about Homeworld. The Empire has been doing things like this, on a smaller scale, for thousands of years. The corrupted gems wandering the earth, the shards of soldiers who survived the rebellion broken but not killed, are smaller versions of the same metaphor. They are beings who have been forced into a shape they did not choose by an empire that did not care to be gentle. The show is building, throughout the run, a coherent picture of what Empire does to bodies, and the cluster is the largest single image in that picture. Once you understand it, every smaller corrupted gem starts to read as another, smaller wound from the same wider violence. The reason none of this feels random comes from the way the show structurally placed the cluster reveal. You hear about it long before you see it. You hear about it from Peridot first, framed as a piece of technical jargon, before you know what she's talking about. You hear about it from Garnet, briefly, with the gravity that signals that this is going to matter. You hear about it from the writing on homeworld walls and flashbacks. You hear about it in the title of an early episode that, on first viewing, seems unrelated. By the time Steven reaches the center of the Earth, the cluster has been mentioned across the run with the same patient consistency that the show used for Pink Diamond. The writers always knew where the center of their world was, and the center was a moral horror that the show was going to ask its protagonist to address with patience and conversation. None of that is random. The cluster is the show's thesis on Empire, buried at the bottom of the world. Now come back up to the surface, into the bright pink garden at the edge of the Steven Universe movie, and meet Spinel. Spinel is the villain of the movie. She is also, structurally, the most concentrated single argument the series ever makes about Pink Diamond's failure as a friend. The premise the movie hands you is straightforward. Spinel was made, thousands of years ago, as a playmate for Pink Diamond, when Pink Diamond was the youngest and least respected member of the Diamond Authority. They were close. They were affectionate. They were, in the show's careful framing, each other's best company. When Pink was eventually given her own colony, Earth, she told Spinel to wait for her in the garden until she came back. She did not come back. The movie reveals that Spinel waited there, alone for thousands of years, without moving, without sleeping, without leaving the spot her friend had told her to stand in. She found out only later, by accident, that the friend who had left her had been dead all along, by her own staged shattering, and was, in another form, alive on Earth, raising a son. The friend had moved on. Spinel had not been told. Take a moment to register the moral weight of that because the movie is built around it. Spinel was not abandoned in a moment of cruelty. She was abandoned by an absence that simply went on for too long. Pink Diamond, in her staged death and her years on Earth as Rose Quartz, did not, by any account the show provides, ever remember to send word back to the friend she had asked to wait in the garden. She forgot her. The case the movie is making is not that Pink was a monster. The case is that Pink was a being whose capacity for self-centering was so complete that she could leave a friend standing in a garden for the equivalent of an entire civilization's worth of human history and never think about her again. Spinel is the bill. She is the part of the story Pink never paid for. She arrives on Earth after Pink has been dead for years and Steven has been living his life as her son, to make her pay it. The thing the show does, in writing Spinel, is to refuse to make her hateable. She is, in the early sequences of the movie, a cartoonish villain, all stretched limbs and elastic body language and unhinged laughter. The movie is making clear from the start that she has been performing, that she has not been a person in any continuous sense for a very long time, that the elastic clowning is the only available shape for a being who has not had anyone to talk to for several thousand years. Once you understand this, the early laughter is not menacing, it is heartbreaking. The movie wanted you to feel the moral disorientation of meeting a being who has been alone too long, and to feel the moral disorientation of being unable to hate her for what she is trying to do. She is, in the strict sense, a child trying to destroy the world that took her friend away. The structural detail of her weapon is also worth noticing. Spinel attacks Earth with a weapon called the Rejuvenator, a small but devastating device that reverses a gem's personal development back to the moment of their original emergence. It is, in essence, a tool that erases the person a gem has chosen to become and returns them to the person Homeworld designed them to be. Spinel wants to undo growth. She wants to undo the time that left her behind. She has been forced, by her abandonment, to remain in her original shape, and her response is to force the people who left her to return to their original shapes too. The crystal gems, when they are hit with a Rejuvenator, lose their entire histories. They no longer remember being on the team. They no longer remember Steven. They no longer remember themselves. Spinel is making the rest of the universe experience, briefly, what she has been experiencing for thousands of years, which is a permanent freeze at the moment of her own design. The musical structure of the movie is also doing precise work here. Spinel has a song, the central song of the movie, in which she lays out, in the most plain possible terms, what she went through. She tells the story of the garden. She tells the story of the wait. She tells the story of finding out, much later, what had happened. The song is funny in the show tune sense, and it is also unbearable in the emotional sense, and the movie is unafraid to let it be both. The movie wanted Spinel's grief to be presentable to a child audience without softening it. The song is performed in a comic register, and the content of the song is one of the most precise pieces of abandonment writing in modern animation. This is the show's signature move. Comedy as carrier for the heaviest possible content, And the movie was confident enough in the series' track record to put the whole thesis in a song that you could dance to. Now consider the resolution. Stephen does not kill Spinel. He does not erase her. He does not, in the end, even defeat her in the conventional sense. The movie has him, late in the third act, do what the show has been training him to do for years. He talks to her. He apologizes on his mother's behalf for what was done to her. He invites her to come back to Earth with him and to try to be a person on the planet with the rest of the survivors his mother left behind. The movie is making, with unusual clarity, the same point the show has been making for years. The only response, in the show's logic, to a being who has been abandoned is to refuse to abandon her again. Stephen cannot fix what Pink did. He can only refuse to repeat it. This is the show's ethic at its most concentrated, and the movie chose Spinel precisely so it could put the ethic in a single being and watch the protagonist try to extend it to her. The movie's ending, with Spinel returning to the diamonds rather than Earth, is itself a careful piece of writing. Stephen offers her a home with him. She does not take it. She goes, instead, to live with the other diamonds, who, for all their many failures, are at least the kind of beings who knew Pink as Pink, and who can give her a place to be where the wound is acknowledged. The movie is unwilling to give itself the easy victory. Spinel is not, at the end, healed. She is not, at the end, restored. She is given a place to be that is not the garden. This is enough, and the show is honest enough to leave her with that small good, rather than insist on a larger one. There is one final reading the fandom has produced, and the show does not, strictly speaking, confirm. The reading is that Spinel is, in some sense, the other version of Stephen. She is what Stephen would have been if his mother had stayed. She is the friend, the playmate, the cheerful companion that Pink chose to make for her own amusement. Stephen is the son, the legacy, the second life that Pink chose to disappear into. The movie is asking you to notice the symmetry, and to notice that Stephen, in extending care to Spinel, is in some sense reaching backward to the version of himself that Pink left behind in order to become the version of herself that became him. The show does not say this in dialogue. The show implies it in the geometry. None of that is random. Spinel was built, with great care, to be the precise moral cost of his mother's choice, and the movie was built, with great care, to ask him to pay it. White Diamond is the oldest, the tallest, the most powerful, and the strangest of the four diamonds, and she is the show's last and most carefully held back antagonist. For most of the run, she is barely visible. You see her on murals. You see her on the diamond authority symbol at the top of the diagram, the largest of the four. You hear other characters speak of her in tones of awe and fear that have to do with rank rather than affection. The show withholds her appearance until almost the very end, and when she finally arrives, she does not disappoint. She is monstrously tall. She does not move like a person. Her face is unnaturally still. Her smile is unnaturally wide. She speaks in a voice that is too gentle for what she is saying. The show built her, deliberately, as the kind of authority figure who is so afraid of disagreement that she has become a kind of doll, and her body language is the externalization of an interior so controlled that it has stopped being a person. The theory worth lingering on is what the show implies about her power. White Diamond has, by her account, the ability to inhabit other gems, to override their will, to make them perform her actions on her behalf. The show demonstrates this on screen. She takes control of the other diamonds. She takes control of Pearl. She takes control, briefly, of Stephen himself. The show is making a precise, structural point about authoritarianism. White Diamond does not need an army. She does not need diplomats. She has the ability to literally use other beings as extensions of her own self, and she has decided that this is the correct way for the universe to be organized. Everyone is, in her view, a piece of her. The show is showing you what total power looks like when it has been left unchecked for long enough that it has stopped being able to imagine other beings as separate from itself. This reading explains why her smile is so wrong. White Diamond is not, in the show's logic, a happy being. She's a being who has spent so long being deferred to that she has lost the ability to register the difference between consent and obedience. When her subordinates praise her, she registers it as truth, because the alternative would require her to think about the fact that they have been afraid of her for thousands of years. When they fail her, she does not get angry in the usual way. She gets disappointed in a way that the show animates as worse than anger, because the disappointment carries with it the suggestion that they have not yet become the pieces of her she expected them to be. The show is showing you the worst kind of authority. Authority that has, through long, uncontested rule, forgotten that other beings are real. Her smile is the result. It is the smile of a being who is no longer in conversation with anyone, and who has come to believe in the deepest part of herself that everyone she has ever met has been, in some sense, herself. The confrontation with Stephen, when it finally comes, is one of the most carefully written sequences in the show. Stephen does not, in the conventional sense, defeat White Diamond. He cannot. She is, on every measurable scale, beyond him. The show, instead, has him do what the show has been training him to do across the entire run. He refuses to perform the role she expects him to perform. She believes him to be Pink Diamond, returned, hiding inside a human shell, and she addresses him as such. She believes that if she removes his gem, the pink underneath will emerge and the universe will be set right. She does this. She removes his gem. The gem walks away in the shape of Pink Stephen, and the show animates the moment as a kind of horror. Stephen, the human, is left without his diamond half. Pink Stephen, the diamond half, is animated as a being with very different body language. Brighter pink, less hesitant, more confident, more demanding. The show has split him briefly into the two halves of himself that have been arguing inside him for the whole series, and it is showing you the experiment that White Diamond demanded. The conclusion of the experiment is the show's clearest single statement of its ethic. The diamond half, alone, is not pink. It is not Rose. It is not anyone but Stephen, with his mother's gem, without his human upbringing. The diamond half walks back to him. The two of them rejoin. Pink Stephen and human Stephen are the same being. The show is putting White Diamond in the position of testing the central question of Stephen's identity, and is having Stephen answer her by demonstrating that he is not, and has never been, his mother. He is what his mother and his father made together with the help of the people who raised him, and that being is not divisible into a diamond and a human. He is one person. The moment lands as a defeat for White Diamond, because she cannot make sense of what she is seeing. The show is precise about this. She does not surrender to a stronger force. She is forced, by the impossibility of the result, to register that her view of the universe is wrong. The show is showing you the only way authoritarianism of her kind can actually be defeated in the show's logic, which is to be confronted with a being it cannot absorb. Stephen is not a piece of her. He cannot be made into a piece of her. He is demonstrably a person, with his own coherence, with his own will, with his own identity. This is what causes her, in the show's logic, to break. She blushes. She becomes embarrassed. She becomes, briefly, small. The show is making the case, with extreme care, that the deepest power of a tyrant is the assumption that everyone is a part of them, and that the deepest defense against a tyrant is the refusal, by individuals, to be absorbed. There is a smaller reading of White Diamond that the fandom returns to, which is that she is, in some sense, the show's portrait of pure ego. She has been the center of attention for so long that she has forgotten the world has any other centers. The yellow and blue diamonds who orbit her have learned to manage her by managing themselves. Pink, the youngest, never learned this. Pink's rebellion was, in part, the rebellion of a diamond who could not bear being a small piece of a larger ego, and who fled to the edge of the empire to become her own center. The show is showing you, in the encounter between Stephen and White, the second generation of that same refusal. Stephen, who has inherited his mother's body without her position, is refusing, on Earth's behalf, to be absorbed back into White Diamond's interior. The rebellion that started with Pink thousands of years ago ends with the child of her child rebellion making the same refusal again, in a smaller voice, with more compassion, and finally being heard. The fact that the show resolves the confrontation by talking, rather than by violence, is itself the thesis. The show does not have Stephen destroy White Diamond. It has him refuse to disappear into her. This is the show's central political claim. The only response to a being who wants to absorb you is to remain visible. The show built the entire final season around the case for this claim, and the confrontation with White Diamond is the case at its largest possible scale. None of that is random either. The show was always going to end with a tyrant who tried to make Stephen smaller, and Stephen refusing to become smaller, and the universe being slightly more habitable as a result. The show built that ending into the show from the first time it cropped White Diamond out of the symbol on a homeworld wall. Now back out of the close-ups and look at the larger graphic design of the show, because the Diamond Authority symbol is doing visual work in almost every scene of the run, and the theory worth lingering on is that the show treats its own logo as a piece of foreshadowing. The symbol itself is a stylized diamond shape made up of 4 smaller diamonds, arranged in a clean geometric figure, with each smaller diamond representing one of the diamonds, white at the top, Yellow on the left, slightly above. Blue on the right, slightly above. Pink at the bottom. This is a deliberately ranked design. The size, the placement, and the angle of each of the four shapes communicates their position in the empire, and the show treats the symbol as a kind of mural of the universe's power structure. Watch where the symbol appears across the run. It is on the walls of every homeworld facility. It is on the floors of palaces. It is on the bottom of bubbles that the crystal gems use to contain corrupted gems. It is on the back of Peridot's uniform before she removes it. It is on the edge of objects that were made for Pink Diamond's court, including, in one famous detail, the back of Pink Diamond's own palanquin. The show is using the symbol as a kind of branding for Empire. Anything stamped with it has been claimed. The show is making the case, again without spelling it out, that this is how empires actually work. They put their mark on objects, on places, on people, and the mark functions, over time, as a constant low-level reminder of who is in charge. There is a smaller detail worth lingering on, which is that the version of the symbol that appears in flashbacks to the war is slightly different from the version that appears in the present day. In the flashbacks, all four diamonds are present, and the pink diamond in the bottom position is intact. In the present day, after Pink's supposed shattering, the symbol is sometimes shown with the pink diamond cracked, or with the pink diamond shown in a different shade, or, in some homeworld contexts, removed altogether. The show is using the iconography to track the political fact of Pink's death. Homeworld, depending on which faction is doing the displaying, either commemorates Pink with a cracked icon, or erases her with a redacted one. The show is, in essence, encoding political history in graphic design, and asking the viewer to track it across the run. The same logic operates with the symbols of the individual diamonds. Yellow Diamond's personal symbol is associated with a downward-pointing yellow diamond on her court's iconography. Blue Diamond's is similar, but in blue. Pink Diamond's was, by the show's logic, a downward-pointing pink diamond. Once you know what each symbol looks like, you can track which diamond's territory you are in by looking at the walls. The show plays this consistently. The zoo is marked with the pink and blue symbols. The reef is blue. The citadel where Yellow holds court is yellow. White's chambers are white. The show built a graphic system robust enough to function as a navigation tool, and used it as one. There is also the detail that Stephen himself, by the later seasons, has effectively inherited his mother's symbol. His shield bears a similar geometric design. His pink projections, when they appear in the final season, are sometimes shaped like the pink diamond icon. The show is encoding his inheritance into his visual presentation, slowly, across the run, and asking the viewer to notice. By the time the show is willing to admit, in plain text, that he is partly his mother, you have spent years watching his powers appear in the shape of her symbol, and the reveal does not feel novel. It feels like a sentence the show has finally given itself permission to say out loud. The other major visual element worth pulling apart is the use of murals on Homeworld. When the show finally takes you to Homeworld in the later seasons, the walls are covered in carved murals depicting the history of the Diamond Authority. The murals show the four diamonds in their relative positions, performing the activities the Empire has decided to commemorate. They show colonization. They show fusion. They show the shattering of Pink Diamond. They show, in some panels, the events of the Earth War. The show is doing what real empires do, which is to write its own history into stone, and to display the history in places where everyone has to walk past it. The murals are not, in the show's logic, a neutral record of the past. They are propaganda. The show is unsubtle about this, and the murals are placed on screen precisely so that the viewer can compare what the Empire chooses to commemorate with what the show, through the actual story, has revealed to be true. The murals are wrong about Pink Diamond's death. The murals are wrong about the war on Earth. The murals are wrong about the moral character of Rose Quartz. The show is using its own iconography to dramatize the gap between official history and what actually happened. There is a further detail in the symbol design that has to be flagged as theory rather than canon because the show does not, strictly speaking, confirm it. The fandom has long observed that the Diamond Authority symbol in its proportions resembles a tarot card design, with the four diamonds arranged in a hierarchical figure that echoes the Tree of Life or the four suits of a classical deck. The show does not say this is intentional. The show does, however, make the case that the Empire's iconography is built around the number 4, in a way that suggests the Empire understands itself as the totality of something. 4 diamonds, 4 colors, 4 corners of the universe. The show is showing you, in the symbol, the Empire's own self-conception, and the Empire's self-conception is, of course, wrong, because the symbol leaves out everyone who is not a diamond. The show built the symbol to be an icon of incompleteness, and the show's eventual claim by the end of the run is that the only complete picture of the universe is one in which everyone, including the off-colors, the pearls, the rubies, the corrupted, the humans, has a place in the diagram. By the final scenes of Steven Universe Future, the symbol on the wall has been quietly redesigned by the show into something larger than 4 diamonds, and that redesign is the show's structural argument about what justice looks like at scale. None of that visual grammar is random either. The show built a graphic identity for its empire, and then spent years using that identity to teach you the politics. By the time you reach the final episodes, the symbol on the wall is not just decoration. It is the show's way of asking you, in every scene, who claims this room and who has been excluded. That is unusually disciplined design for a children's cartoon, and it is one of the strongest pieces of evidence the show provides that nothing in its visual language is incidental. The walls were always telling you the story too. Come back to the very beginning of every episode, to the short song that plays over the opening credits, the song the show calls its theme. The original opening of Steven Universe, the one that ran for most of the show's main run, is performed by the 3 crystal gems in chorus, and it is, by the standards of children's animation, almost defiantly soft. They sing about being together, about loving each other, about protecting the people who love them, about always saving the day. This opening, which feels so simple on first listen that it almost vanishes into the cheerful music underneath it, is actually one of the most precise pieces of foreshadowing the show ever wrote, and almost every line of it pays off in some specific way across the run. Start with the line about saving the day. That is a promise the show breaks, deliberately more than once. The crystal gems are sometimes late. The crystal gems sometimes fail to save the day. The crystal gems sometimes save the day at a cost. The line is not, by the end of the run, true in the way it is presented. The show is making a quiet point. The opening is the version of themselves the crystal gems wish they were. The actual episodes, especially in the later seasons, will be about the gap between the version they wish they were and the version they actually are. The show wrote a theme song that contained its own dramatic irony from the first day, and trusted that it would matter eventually. Then there is the line about the people who believe in them. The theme song has the gems sing, in chorus, that they are who they are because of the people who love them. This is, on the surface, a sweet sentiment about found family. The show then spends years complicating it. Pearl loves Steven, and her love is shaped by her love for his mother. Amethyst loves Steven, and her love is shaped by her need to be needed. Garnet loves Steven, and her love is shaped by her own choices about who she is. The theme song's claim that we are who we are because of the people who love us is being tested across the run, and the test is not always passed cleanly. The people who love Steven sometimes love him in ways that ask too much of him, and the show is honest about this. The opening sings the ideal. The episodes show the work. Now look at how the opening changes across the run. There are several revisions to the title sequence, and each one carries information. In the early seasons, the opening is performed by the 3 crystal gems alone, and Steven appears at the end of it. In the later seasons, after his role in the team has expanded, his face is added to the lineup. After Connie's role in the team has expanded, her face is sometimes added too. After the team has gained Peridot, Lapis, and Bismuth as members, they appear in some versions. The show is using the opening as a kind of census of who counts as the team at each point in the story. The opening is, in essence, the show's running family portrait, and the additions and changes track the slow expansion of what counts as family. None of that is random. The opening is the show's most public statement of its own roster, and the roster is meant to be read as growing. The Steven Universe Future opening is the most carefully written of all of them, and it is one of the most direct statements the show ever makes about its protagonist's interior life. The future opening places Steven himself at the center of the song. The show is signaling in the very first seconds of the new series that the run has reorganized. Steven is now the center of the song. The gems take a different role in the music. The opening is in his voice. The show is telling you, before the first episode of Future even begins, that the question of the series has changed. The question is no longer whether the team can protect Steven. The question is whether Steven, having protected everyone else, can find a way to be a person on his own behalf. The opening admits this in the first half-minute, and the rest of the season earns it. There is also a smaller but important detail about the lyrics of the opening. The original chorus contains the line about always being there, about always being on hand to save the day. The future opening replaces that promise with a softer, more uncertain set of lines in which Steven is, in a sense, looking around for himself rather than for the next threat. The show is using the change in lyric content to mark, in a very precise way, the change in the show's emotional logic. The original opening is about commitment to others. The future opening is about commitment to self. This distinction is the entire structural difference between the main series and the epilogue, and the show announced it through music before it bothered to dramatize it in the plot. None of that is random either. The opening was always doing structural work, and the show was always trusting it to. The argument that the theme song was planned at this level of detail is supported by the credits as well. The art that plays under the song across the run includes specific iconographic choices that the show pays off later. The figure of rose quartz, the figure of the temple, the silhouette of the crystal gems against the moon, the small inclusion or exclusion of Stephen himself in certain frames, all of these are arranged with the same care the show brings to its symbol design. The opening is, in essence, a brief mural that the show is updating across the run, and the updates are themselves a way of telling you what the show now considers true about its own characters. The fandom has spent years tracking these changes and producing detailed comparisons of each version. The show was making the comparisons too, and the writers were aware, every time they changed a frame, that the audience would notice. The opening was a conversation between the writers and the audience, conducted in pictures, across the entire run. There is one final detail worth lingering on, which is the placement of Pink Diamond, or rather her absence, in the opening art across the run. Before the reveal, Rose's portrait is the most visible pink presence in the credits, and the diamond authority symbol, when it appears in background art, is shown without its fourth corner. After the reveal, certain elements of the opening art shift to acknowledge the truth. The show is using its own opening sequence to redesign itself after its biggest reveal, and the redesign is a way of telling the viewer that the show, going forward, will speak in a different register about its central character's mother. The writers built that capacity into the opening from the beginning, knowing they would need it later. None of that is random. The opening of Steven Universe is one of the most carefully maintained pieces of self-conscious foreshadowing in modern animation, and it is hiding inside a short song you have probably already heard 100 times without noticing what it was doing. Now move into Steven Universe Future, the epilogue series the show released after the main run had ended, and the movie had wrapped up the largest open plot threads. Future is, in structural terms, an unusual project. It does not exist to resolve a story the show had not yet finished. It exists to address a question the main run had quietly raised and could not, in the format of weekly adventures, fully answer. The question is this: what happens to a child who has been the emotional load-bearer for everyone around him for his entire life after the work of saving the universe is finished? Future is the show's diagnosis of its own protagonist, and the diagnosis is one of the most carefully written portraits of unprocessed grief in animation. The opening premise of Future is, on the surface, deceptively bright. The war is over. The diamonds have been pacified. Earth is, by an accident of love and political settlement, the home of a growing community of off-planet refugees, and Steven is helping to organize their integration into a kind of school. He has Connie. He has his father. He has his gem family. He has a life. The show takes about an episode to make clear that under the surface of all of this, something is wrong with him. He is not sleeping well. He is not finishing his sentences. He is asking, in a tone the show is careful to make sound casual, what he is supposed to do now. Future is going to be the show finally letting Steven ask the question that the main run kept asking everyone else to answer for him. What does he want? The show, having spent years showing him be the answer to other people's questions, is going to make him sit with the experience of not having a question to answer, and the consequence is going to be enormous. The structural device the show uses to dramatize this is his glow. Across the run of Future, Steven, when he becomes emotionally overwhelmed, begins to turn pink. The pink is not voluntary. He cannot control it. It happens when he is angry, when he is afraid, when he is grieving, when he is being asked to be useful and is unable to comply. The show is externalizing his interior. The pink is the part of him he has been suppressing for years. Pink is the diamond half of his nature, the half he never asked for, the half he has been trying to keep small. Future is, in essence, the slow story of what happens when that half stops being willing to stay small. The show is using the visual of his glow, which by the late episodes becomes alarming, as a way of asking the audience to register in their bodies that something is genuinely wrong with him, that he is not making it through this on willpower alone, and that the work of healing is going to require more than his usual repertoire of patient kindness. The most quietly devastating episodes of Future are the ones where Steven, having been the receptacle for everyone else's healing for years, tries to ask for help, and finds that nobody around him has been trained to provide it for him. The show is being honest about a real dynamic. Children who are the emotional center of their families often find, when they finally need someone to listen, that the people around them are accustomed to listening only when he is the one talking about other people's problems. The gems, who love him, do not, at first, know how to be the people he needs. Pearl tries, Garnet tries, Amethyst tries. The show is careful to make clear that the trying is real. It is also, in the early stretches of future, not enough. The show is making, with extreme care, the case that being loved is not the same thing as being supported, and that the work of figuring out how to support a person you love is its own discipline that the people around Stephen have not yet had to learn. The climactic episode of Future, the one in which Stephen, in a moment of overwhelm, transforms into an enormous pink monster and rampages across Beach City, is one of the most direct images the show ever produced. The show is showing you in concrete visual form what years of unprocessed feeling look like when they finally arrive. He becomes the size of the temple. He becomes the size of his grief. He is no longer recognizable as himself. The show is making a literal version of the metaphor it has been building for years. The diamond half of him, the part that can grow, the part that can give life, the part that the watermelons inherited, has finally turned on him, because he has been refusing to let it be part of him for too long. The monster is not a punishment. The monster is the part of him he has been hiding from. The show is asking the people around him to confront this version of him, and to demonstrate that they love him in this form too. This is the only available healing in the show's logic. He cannot be loved only when he is small and helpful. He has to be loved when he is enormous and out of control. The resolution of the episode is one of the most generous pieces of writing in the run. The gems and Connie and Greg do not, in the conventional sense, defeat the monster. They reach him. They climb him. They hold him. They tell him, in the most precise terms the show has ever used, that they love him in this form too. The show is making the case, in plain language, that the work of healing a person who has been over-functioning for years is to insist on loving them when they have stopped being able to function. That is the show's central ethic, applied to the protagonist, in a sequence where the protagonist himself is the one being healed by the practice he has been teaching everyone else. The show was always going to end this way, and the show built every other healing moment in the run as a kind of training for the final one. None of it is random. The protagonist is healed by the practice he taught the universe. The final episode of Future, the one in which Stephen, having recovered from his transformation, decides to leave Beach City for a while and drive out to discover the rest of his own life, is the show's quietest possible ending. He does not save the world. He does not defeat a villain. He packs his car. He says goodbye to his family. He drives. The show is making the case, in its closing shot, that the proper end of an over-functioning child's story is the moment when he is finally allowed to leave. He is not running away. He is going. This distinction is the entire point. The show has been training him, and the audience, to understand that loving the people you love requires you to let them become themselves. And the final image of the show is Stephen exercising that lesson on his own behalf. He is becoming himself. The gems wave. Connie waves. Greg waves. He drives. The credits run. The reason none of this feels random comes from how exactly the ending mirrors the beginning. The first episode opened on Stephen alone in his loft, singing about a missing snack under a portrait of a woman he could not remember. The final episode closes on Stephen alone in his car, driving away from the loft with the portrait behind him, finally able to leave the silhouette he had been standing in for his whole life. The show is making a structural argument with the image. The boy under the portrait is, by the end, a young man who has metabolized the portrait enough to drive out from under it. This is the only available ending for a show that has been about inheritance, identity, and the work of becoming the person you were never allowed to choose to be. The show planned that ending. The show built everything else to support it. None of the journey was random. The arc was always going to bring him there. There is one more class of detail worth lingering on before we close out, and it is the one the fandom most frequently underestimates, which is the so-called filler episodes. The show, across its long run, produced dozens of episodes that, on first viewing, look like small breaks from the larger plot. An episode in which Stephen helps a Beach City resident with a minor personal problem. An episode in which the gems learn how to use a household appliance. An episode in which Stephen and Connie attend a movie. An episode in which everyone gets stuck in a small space and has to talk to each other. These episodes and many other long-form animated shows would be exactly what they look like, which is space holders, designed to fill out an order between the load-bearing arcs. In Steven Universe, almost none of them are. The show used the filler episodes to do load-bearing work, and the work usually does not become visible until much later in the run, sometimes seasons later. Take, as one example, the episodes about the residents of Beach City. The show, very early, introduces a small cast of locals, the boardwalk vendors, the mayor, the teenage workers at the fry shop, the donut shop staff, the cool kids. These characters, who would in another show be background color, are, in this show, given quiet but consistent emotional lives. The fry shop boy gets a small arc about his relationship with his older brother. The donut shop girl gets a small arc about her ambitions outside Beach City. The mayor gets a small arc about his anxiety and his loneliness. The cool kids get a small arc about their fluctuating identities. The show is, in these small episodes, demonstrating its central claim. Every being you meet, even a passing background figure, has an interior life that is worth taking seriously. The show is doing this work on the residents of Beach City because the show is going to ask, by the end of the run, that the protagonist extend the same care to the residents of the entire galaxy. The local episodes are training. They are training the protagonist, and they are training the audience to perform the moral discipline the show is going to need them to perform later. At scale, take, as another example, the episodes about household chaos. The gems learn how to use a phone. The gems learn how to use a bath. The gems struggle with a small repair. These episodes, on the surface, are comic. They are also doing a structural job. They are showing you the gap between the crystal gems' competence and their original element, which is interstellar warfare, and their incompetence and the kind of daily life Steven is trying to build with them. The show is making, in these episodes, the case that the work of coexisting across enormous experiential gaps requires patience, humor, and the willingness to be inept. The gems are trying. They are bad at it. They are willing to keep trying. This is the show's working portrait of what living with strangers actually looks like, and the strangers in question, by the end of the run, will be the entire gem refugee population on Earth. The household episodes are demonstrations. Then there are the episodes that are, in retrospect, foreshadowing. The episode in which Steven discovers he can heal a cracked gem very early in the run becomes load-bearing when the corrupted gem's arc arrives much later. The episode in which Steven discovers he can enter dreams becomes load-bearing when the diamond's arc arrives. The episode in which Steven discovers he can bubble objects becomes load-bearing when he has to contain things he cannot heal. The show was, very early, planting the powers the protagonist would need much later, and was doing so in the form of small standalone episodes that, on first viewing, looked like one-off curiosities. This is one of the cleanest pieces of long-form planning in modern animation. The protagonist's toolkit was being assembled, piece by piece, across the run, in episodes that mostly did not signal what they were doing while they were doing it. By the time the toolkit is needed, every tool has already been introduced. The show never has to invent a power for the protagonist on the spot. Every power he uses has its own origin episode, and the origin episodes are scattered through the run in a deliberate sequence. None of that is random. There are also the episodes that, on first viewing, look like they are about minor characters and turn out to be about the protagonist. An episode in which Steven counsels Connie's parents about their relationship is, on a second viewing, an episode about Steven's own discomfort with the way the adults in his life manage their feelings. An episode in which Steven helps Lapis settle into Earth is, on a second viewing, an episode about Steven's growing awareness that not every being can be loved into stability. An episode in which Steven sits with Greg through a small crisis is, on a second viewing, an episode about Steven realizing that his father needs him as much as he needs his father. The show is using the filler structure as cover for some of its most intimate emotional writing. By disguising the central character's growth as the resolution of someone else's problem, the show gets to write growth without announcing it. This is one of the most effective, long-form storytelling techniques the show ever uses, and it is the reason so many of the so-called filler episodes are remembered, years later, as some of the most affecting moments in the run. The final and most important class of filler episode is the one in which nothing, in the strict sense, happens. An episode in which Steven and Connie sit on the beach and talk. An episode in which Garnet teaches Steven a small lesson and the lesson does not pay off in plot. An episode in which Pearl mourns Rose, quietly, in a way that does not become a confrontation. The show is, in these episodes, doing the work that almost no children's television does, which is to demonstrate that an episode can be valuable without being eventful. This is one of the show's most radical structural choices. It is treating the daily fabric of life as a thing worth filming. It is treating quiet conversation as a thing worth animating. It is treating the slow accumulation of small intimacies as a thing worth devoting an entire episode to. The show wanted to demonstrate, in form as well as in content, that the lives of the people it cared about were worth attention even when they were not in crisis. This is, in itself, a politics. The show was building a case, episode by episode, for the proposition that being a person is the main thing, and being a hero is something a person sometimes has to do on the way to being a person. None of that is random either. The filler is the show. The crisis episodes are the visitors. Steven Universe, more than almost any other show in its medium, understood this from the beginning. So now you have the case, the Cookie Cat song, the Pink Diamond reveal, the Temple's rooms, Greg in the van, Pearl's sword, Garnet's design, Amethyst's wound, the Watermelon Stevens, Connie's constancy, Lapis in the Mirror, Peridot's conversion, the cluster at the center of the planet, Spinel in the garden, White Diamond's smile, the diamond authority symbol in every background, the opening song's slow rewrite, Steven Universe future as diagnosis, the filler episodes that were not filler. Every one of these is a piece of the larger argument, which is that the show was built with a level of long-form forethought that almost nothing in its medium has matched, and that the closer you look at it, the more it turns out to have been telling you in plain sight exactly where it was going. Zoom out one last time and think about what it meant that this show existed at all. Steven Universe premiered on Cartoon Network in late 2013, in a moment when the medium of children's animation was just starting to remember that it was allowed to be patient. It ran for over 150 episodes across 5 seasons, then took a small breath, then released a feature-length film, then returned for a final coda series, and then ended. Across that run, it changed what was possible in American children's television, put a queer marriage on screen in a register that was not played for shock or punchline, and it did so in a country where, at the time of its broadcast, that was still a small political act. It put a serious treatment of trauma, grief, and intergenerational harm into a show that was, on paper, about a boy with a magic stomach gem and a love of fast food. It taught a generation of viewers, including a lot of viewers who were not children, that the metaphor of fusion could be used to talk about consent, intimacy, abuse, and love, all in the same vocabulary, and that the same metaphor could be used to talk about empire at scale. It is worth pausing in this last stretch to acknowledge the people who built it. The show was created by Rebecca Sugar, by most accounts the first solo woman to create a series for Cartoon Network. She wrote songs for it, she storyboarded for it, she designed for it, she set its tone. She had a writer's room of unusual continuity with several people who stayed with the show for most of its run, and her brother contributed art and ideas across the whole project. The show, as a piece of production history, was held together by an unusually small, unusually tight, unusually devoted group of people, and the consistency of its planning is, in the end, the consistency of their attention. Almost none of what this video has described tonight could have happened in a show with the more typical structure of network animation. Steven Universe was, by the standards of its industry, a very strange object, and the strangeness was the reason it could be as carefully built as it was. It is also worth acknowledging that the show had a difficult time on its way to its ending. It was, by all accounts, often broadcast in irregular blocks, shuffled around the schedule, given short runways and uncertain renewals, and yet it still managed to deliver one of the most coherent long-form arcs in the medium. The planning baked into the show is partly a response to that uncertainty. The writers, knowing they could not count on a tidy season order, embedded their setups everywhere so that any episode could pay off any earlier one, and so that the show could survive being broadcast out of order without losing its shape. This is one of the reasons the show feels so dense on rewatch. The writers were planting in every episode the small seeds they would need to be able to harvest in any later episode, and the audience, watching the show in real time across years of irregular release, did not always notice the planting until the harvest arrived. What this means, if you have stayed with the video this long, is that almost every observation in it has been an observation about the same thing. The show was paying attention. The show was paying attention to its protagonist's emotional architecture, to the rooms his family lived in, to the songs his friends sang, to the symbols on the walls of his enemies, to the colors on the bodies of the beings he loved, to the small green melons in the garden behind his house, to the smile on the face of the largest tyrant in the universe. The show was paying attention to every one of those things at the same time, across years of weekly half-hour episodes, and the attention is the thesis. None of the details examined tonight were random, because the people who made the show refused to permit themselves randomness. They wrote, drew, scored, and edited the show as if every frame might matter to someone, sometime, and the resulting object is, accordingly, a piece of television that rewards almost any amount of close looking. If you are still here, still resting, still letting the words wash over you in the dark, then thank you, sincerely, for the company. This is the kind of video that gets made because shows like Steven Universe make people want to keep talking about them in the small hours of the night. Falling asleep to a slow voice, explain the cartoon you loved as a teenager, is, in its way, a small act of care that the show would, I think, have approved of. This is what the show wanted in the end. To be loved slowly, by people who were willing to look closely and to give them something to carry into the rest of their lives. If it has done that for you, even in this very small way tonight, then we have all done our jobs. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.